But on the ocean, there is no way to get a monopoly on governance. You need that static land that you can win a war and then climb to the top of that bloody hierarchy and control other people. That's what democracy is. It's farming people, taxing people. It's a farm. And so we think we're free, but half of our working time is going straight to the state. But on the ocean, if people can move around, then governance becomes a product. And the only way I can prosper is by serving customers.
Right. Last one of the day. Cheers.
To you, sir.
So, here's the story I was going to tell you.
Alrighty.
It's not a great story, but I laughed out loud so I interviewed Grant yesterday. Grant, for those listening, he's a kind of James Bond-esque character that lives on a retro 50s looking floating kind of house just off the coast of a tropical island. It's basically the kind of, if you were creating a Bond villain, he might have a place, or maybe even Bond himself. It would either be the villain or Bond. Bond would be hanging out there on a sort of furry couch at the end of the film, bedding some babe after he saved the world. Or the character, this is where we first learn about this character, the actual baddie. Anyway, so Grant, who we'll probably talk about because he's a seasteader, I asked him in the podcast yesterday, how did you get going? Like, how do you end up doing something like this? Because I think it's quite crazy to think that that's a business model even. Like, here's like I said to him, you've got a lot of balls even coming up with that as an idea. And he said, yeah, it's funny. He said, I thought I'd never do another startup in my life. And I went, what do you mean? He said, yeah, I thought I'd never do a startup, another one. I'd done I made a load of money. I did startups. I thought I'd never do it again. And I said, why did you do it then? And he said, I met this guy on a plane. He said, I got on a plane and I sat down next to a guy called Joe Quirk. Is that right?
That's right.
You met him on a plane.
I'll never forget the moment.
I'll tell you, when he said it to me, I was like, I can so imagine that. You met this guy and then a few years later, you've plowed millions of dollars into floating cities and there are very beautiful looking structures. It's not just some, sometimes you see a prototype of a seastead or stuff, and they're prototypes, aren't they? This guy's got jet ski lifts and fitted kitchens, curved surfaces. It's incredible.
It's incredible.
Drone tech, and I like I said, where'd you cook? He said, we're organising this service where a drone delivery of food from the mainland that would just drop 3 times a day, drops. Mm-hmm. I'm like, dude, who thinks like that? Like, literally, who thinks like that?
James Bond thinks like that.
Yeah, he does.
And he is James Bond.
Well, he's got that, I think there's a debonaireness about him. And there's certainly a kind of... it's the kind of, I don't know, my boy, for example, my youngest son, he would dream up something like that. What I like about Grant is he has actually built this thing. I mean, it's bordering on insanity, I think, to decide to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, to live in it is a big deal because it's not for everyone. And I was skeptical. I thought, maybe he's not really living in it. But he is living in it.
He hates stepping on land.
Yeah.
Hates it. He is James Bond. I write about him in my book. I'm writing a book right now where Grant is featured in it. He's one of the heroes in real life.
Called Grant. Have you changed the name?
No, it's a true story. Oh. And I call him the real most interesting man in the world. And when I introduce him, I introduce the script to a commercial. Now imagine there's the real most interesting man in the world. And you could show him doing this when he's a child, him doing this as an adult, him doing this with different hairstyles all around the world, this entrepreneurship, being chased by these, mafia bosses. And it's like, this isn't a fake movie. This is the real life of Grant Romundt. And I was even thinking to myself, God, this guy's like James Bond. And I don't know if you saw my talk.
I did. No, I caught the second half, but yeah.
Did you see Grant in the motorboat?
The drone stuff.
No, when Chad and Nadia were on the run from the Thai Navy.
Oh, was that him? I didn't cotton on to that.
Yeah.
Because I saw his talk afterwards. I didn't know who he was at that point. I just walked into the back of the room and you were speaking, very animated, I have to say. You were really going for it.
Yeah. Like 3 months after I met Grant on that plane, he flew to Thailand. I mean, first I want to tell you the story. He rescued Chad and Nadia. They're alive because of him. He and I met in Singapore. He rented a high-speed speedboat and raced out into international waters to illegally deliver them the entry paperwork so they could get into Singapore 1 minute before the Singapore police surrounded them with gunboats while fighter jets flew overhead and a SWAT team with bulletproof jackets boarded the Cervantes and then looked at their paperwork and realized they could get in for free. And then Grant led them in. But he even said to me, he was talking about it, he's like, man, when we were blasted out into international waters on that speedboat, it was kind of like James Bond. And I'm like...
Have you looked in the mirror?
Yeah.
I mean, he dresses in a way like very interestingly as well, doesn't he? I know what you mean. The real most interesting man in the world.
Most interesting man in the world. Yeah. So meeting him on the plane was an experience I will never forget because...
Can I just say something? You literally sat next to him on a plane.
We were changing planes on the way to a conference called Anarchapulco.
Oh, yeah, in Mexico.
Which is an anarchist thing in Anarchapulco. And I was going to speak at it, and I had put together this presentation to announce to the most radical anarchist audience that the first seastead has actually been built and Chad and Nadia are sleeping on it. And it was probably just a few days before the Thai Navy declared a death threat. So I was high on life. And on the way there, I was wearing a T-shirt saying, "Stop arguing, stop seasteading."
Start seasteading.
Start seasteading? What did I say?
Stop seasteading. Seasteading.
Start arguing, stop steading. I'm losing my abilities to do it. I've said it so many times. That's why I put it on a shirt, so I have to say this crap that I made up. Aquapreneur. It's hard to keep track of all these things I've made up, at least.
Dude, I was quoting all your words in Coral Creek. I've committed them all to memory, mate.
Good.
I love new words, and I love Seastead has had a lot of new words.
Yeah,
Coral Creek's my favorite.
Yeah, they're all mine, because I'm trying to pop you out of your land-based assumption and get you thinking in a new way and giving you a new word to thinking about it. And then when you have that new word, you don't forget what I'm saying. Because I'm trying to convince people of a completely new idea and completely shift 8 paradigms they have in their heads. But Grant, so I've explained seasteading to thousands of people over the last 12 years. 99% of the time, they look at me like I'm crazy and say, "Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, okay, I'm going to go walk over here now." Some of them get really mad because you might be free, and that makes a lot of people mad. Some people get converted or they come around slowly. Grant was the fastest conversion I've ever seen. So he asked me a question. I started answering it. He looks away and thinks for a minute and looks around, looks up in the air. You can watch the wheels turning in his head. And then he asks another question, and then I'm answering it, and he's kind of looking around thinking. It's like he's checking apps in his head. And I could see the wheels turning in his head within minutes of me talking about it. So then at the Anarchapulco audience, he'd approach me every now and again, and he'd have another question. I'd answer him, and he'd kind of nod, and he'd walk away. And he'd come back and ask another question. He'd nod and he'd kind of walk away. And then I gave my presentation where I showed this rickety, crazy thing, outside international waters in the Andaman Sea. And when I was off the stage, he just walks over to me and he goes, "I'm in." And I'm like, "What do you mean in?" He's like, "With both feet." And he's like, "I'll fly anywhere you need to go. You need me to go." And I'm like, "Well, you need to go to Thailand." He's like, "All right, I'll leave immediately." He's like, I'll do anything you need to make this happen. And he's like, "I know a lot about new technology." And he's sort of going through his resume. I can put all the technologies together. I need to go out there and see this thing. So he literally flew to Thailand and went out on a motorboat and was on the Seastead probably, a few days, less than a week before the Thai Navy would have attacked. Then he goes to Thailand. No, he goes back. It's kind of a long story. He goes back to Canada, goes to Thailand, is doing a meditation retreat up in the mountains. The death threat comes. Grant is one of the only people they can communicate with because they have to trust what he's going to do. They are rejected from Malaysia. And so they have to do an absolutely impossible task, this insane race through 500 miles, 800 kilometers of piracy waters, the most piracy-infested waters in the world, in a sailboat through the most trafficked cargo ship lane in the world to make it all the way to friggin' Singapore, because it's the only reasonably free country in the area. Every time they give anyone information, they're on Facebook posting about it. So they have to decide to just cut off the entire world. Grant, who they'd met 3 months before after they met me, was one of the few people they'd trust. So me and Grant arranged to meet in Singapore, which, with me having no idea what the plan is. And my job was to give a speech, which I wasn't supposed to give. I had to arrange for the organizer to cede half his time for me to give a 15-minute speech to create an excuse for why Seasteaders were there. So I'm giving a speech knowing that there's some crazy rescue plan that makes no sense to me because it's so far away from Thailand if you're going by sailboat. And they didn't have their exit stamps to get out of Singapore. This is the climax of my book that I'm giving away here. While I'm creating a diversion, Grant rented a high-speed speedboat and jumped in it and raced out there at completely high speeds, not knowing he was on a race with at least 3 police boats with about 6 to 8 armed policemen on each one to go out there and arrest him. Fighter jets took off from Singapore to go meet this threat to Thai sovereignty. Grant got to them 1 minute before, handed over the entry paperwork, and he says, I swear it was within a minute, these speedboats just come right up to us with big guns pointed at Chad and Nadia. And he just sort of backed off as the guide boat, and they got on there several times, got off the boat, put on bulletproof vests, raided it again, and it was, Chad and Nadia just saying hi and being friendly until they figured out these people aren't terrorists. And they looked at their paperwork and it all passed muster and they let them into Singapore. And thus they were saved by Grant Romundt 3 months after he met them because he wanted to make seasteading happen. And I can confirm that Grant had already made connections with the leading aquatect in the world at the Singapore conference. All of Ocean Builder's technology was open source, so he could have just used it. He could have just moved on and done this without them. But he chose to risk his life. If I can quote, I'm going to quote what he said in the book. So he's flying into Singapore, and he has all these pictures of his time on the Seastead. And he literally says to me, like, well, I could be tortured to give up all this information if they catch me. So I deleted everything and put it on a heavily encrypted drive, and then I just went in. So he completely, without telling anyone, including me, what the hell he was doing, he completely risked his life to save them, while everyone else was throwing them under the bus or giving them away on social media, because he wanted to seastead. And then they all flew across the world, went to the other side of the world in Panama. It just so happens I had been invited to Panama by our seasteading ambassador there. I met with the government, and with Grant, we presented at the presidency, at the Panama Canal Authority. We made all these arrangements with the Panama government, and they're hosting a seastead factory there, and they're all building there. And now Grant is CEO of Ocean Builders. So this is the most insane resume. What's the hardest job you ever got? Well, to get this job, I had to rescue these people in international waters from a Thai Navy that would torture and I had to pay for the privilege to do this. He has contacts in Panama, and he had them flown there, and he had to pay for their luggage. He had to pay for their plane tickets, and then he flew back to Thailand and went back to his meditation master, and within a couple days of rescuing them, was back in Thailand on the top of a mountain training meditation with his meditation master.
Can you tell me a bit about, I didn't drill him about his past. He just said startups. I didn't really go beyond that. I felt like I probably should have known, so I didn't go there. But what is his history?
As I portray it in the real and most interesting man in the world, in the book, where he swoops in all of a sudden to save them, he has had a long, interesting, unusual life. At 11, I should have memorized it so I could tell you. He was featured in Canada as the first paperless office. He was featured in their newspapers, a young entrepreneur. As an 11-year-old, he wrote some kind of code for something that won some sort of scientific award. I've already forgotten what it is. He designed special haircutting scissors.
Really?
Yeah, he ran a very popular hairdressing salon TV show where he served as host and sometimes as model. He got involved in various crypto things. He was a roommate of one of the co-founders of PayPal before PayPal was founded.
They did that Satoshi boat thing as well, didn't they?
Yeah, and then Ocean Builders bought an entire cruise ship.
Yeah.
So while everyone else was panicking during COVID, they bought a gigantic cruise ship, thinking they were going to just say, "Hey, Seasteaders, we have a cruise ship. We need to fill all the rooms." That didn't work out, but they literally bought the cruise ship, picked it up in Europe, sailed it around the Mediterranean with a full staff, sailed it across the Atlantic with a full staff. Then brought it to the Caribbean. It's like a 4-month vacation. Then realized this plan wasn't going to work out. It cost like $50,000 a month for this thing to sit still in the water. They're about to financially go down the toilet. They end up selling it at a profit and pocket $7 million. I guess I'm not supposed to say that, but too late I said it. So the media is portraying this as a failure. YouTube videos are made about what idiots they are. Okay, you sail around on a cruise ship by yourself, Caribbean, Atlantic, Mediterranean for like 4 months. You end up making a couple $1 million. That's called a success.
Yeah. No, it did get absolute. I mean, it was obviously quite a lot of very sneery journalism talking about it.
Yeah,
but I couldn't find a positive. I couldn't find a balanced version of the story. All I got was sort of Guardian, that kind of stuff.
And they don't tell the truth. I mean, you might have heard me at the end of my talk calling out any journalists that are secretly in the audience, saying the reason you're lying and lying and lying about all the positive aspects of seeing is because you're terrified we might set a better example than your shitty government that you worship.
I don't even think that they think like that. I mean, I was a journalist for years, and I worked with journalists.
What is wrong with you people?
I was a nice journalist, but I still was ideologically captured, and I was incentivized to do certain things. Fortunately, I worked for The Independent. I don't know whether you know The Independent.
Yeah.
Back then, it was considered a really free-thinking kind of place. We were, in the UK, we were anti-royalist, for example, which was unheard of. All the papers loved the royals, We did do you remember when Charles married Camilla?
Yeah.
Prince, right. So all the papers whenever there's a royal wedding, it's massive in the UK. I was the chief photographer at the time of the paper, and they sent me to cover. So at the wedding of the royal family was in Windsor, which is, just outside London. And there's a registry office in Windsor, and someone else was getting married. Just a random couple were getting married in a registry office, which is not a big church, it's just like the formal. So they said, right, as a fuck you to the royal family, go and cover that wedding. You never guess who it was. It was the the guy who was getting married was a descendant of Thomas Crapper. The guy,
I know who that is.
The guy who invented the toilet seat, the flushing toilet or whatever. His surname was even Crapper.
Yeah.
So we ran a front page of their wedding. Didn't mention the royals at all. And the headline
hilarious.
was "Wedding in Windsor" kind of thing, but that's the way the paper thought. We thought we were really kind of, but still, when I think about it, you're not incentivized to necessarily get a long, truthful, solution. Yeah. You're incentivized to make people read and to do something that gets readers.
Right.
It's completely different to what we're doing now. One of our objectives is to bring out the truth, to find the truth. We want to, and it's going to take a while probably. It's going to take a couple of hours probably to find the truth. Mm-hmm. You can't do that in the old media, and I don't think they're not bad people. They're just working to a certain remit, and also you get wrapped up in it. I told this story to someone the other day. It was like we had a Jewish editor for a couple of years, and so often he would because he's in the Jewish community, he'd cover Jewish stories, right? And I remember once they sent me down to a graveyard because it had been decimated, and this was a big story, and I went down there and it wasn't decimated, it was just vandalized. Do you know what I mean? It was. And I was like, this isn't, I don't think this is what they think it is. This is teenagers scratching things on gravestones. This isn't a decimation of a. Right. So I took some photos, didn't think anything of it. It still arrived on the front page. You know what I mean? So, yeah. And I was complicit in that, even though I felt, I don't feel like I'm a bad person, but you kind of work in there. You're going to get sent on a job. You're going to do that thing. And and the guy, the editor, he's doing it because he's part of a community and they're worried about it for other reasons. This helps the cause. Oh, let's do it. It's not bad. I mean, there are a lot of bad people, but on the whole, it's just people with incentives. And, that if there's a girl, someone did a absolute hit piece on Free Cities recently. I think it was horrendous. I mean, it was so badly researched. Yeah. And obviously full of lies. The one I think the most, the egregious one is whenever they go to Honduras, they check out Prospera and they're like, neo-colonialist nonsense. They go to Morazan and they're like, hey, let's just forget about that one then. Like, Morazan, there's no way. It doesn't fit the narrative at all. And that's why you never hear about Morazan. They never report on Morazan. Yeah. Blue collar, 60 families living there, Hondurans, working hard, living a good life. Yeah. It's narratives, isn't it? It's all narratives.
Yeah. Now, conflict. I've written a lot of fiction, and I've coached struggling authors to become award-winning authors. And I say the same thing every time. Every page has to have conflict. As soon as there's something good happen, the people go and check Facebook. They're going to put your book down at every page. So there's always suspense. You're always worried about a conflict. You're always worried what's going to happen next. That's what people focus on. That's human nature. No conflict, no story. Stories are about conflict. So newspapers and media are kind of about that. You got to make people mad. You got to make them afraid. You got to provoke all these primal emotions. And there has to be a conflict. There has to be a villain. And villains animate people more than heroes. So you can get people to read your story with the devil, even if there's no God in it. You got to always have a devil. Yeah.
You think the hero is not as strong as the baddie? What did you call it? I forgot.
The villain.
Villain. Yeah.
Yeah, villains are one-dimensional characters usually, and I think what provokes us to pay attention is somebody doing something bad, and then we can all point and yell and scream. So if I have, an afternoon to go learn about seasteading, and I'm going to talk to this Joe Quirk guy, all the good things he's telling me isn't a story. It's not until I can take something out of context that makes him seem like a jerk, or he's creating a tax haven, or whatever's going to provoke people to click on what I'm doing. Because my goal is to get clicks. So I'm selling eyeballs to advertisers. That's all I'm doing. In some cases, maybe I'm trying to get subscriptions. But it's all a race to the bottom, and you don't have time to get to the truth. So I sympathize with that challenge. Look, I'm trying to tell the truth about the Chad and Nadia story, and it's taken me 5 years to get to the bottom of the truth. because luckily I'm trained myself as a novelist. So I understand. I want to get to the motivations. What was the motivation of the Thai Navy? What was the motivation of the journalists? What is going on? It's not enough just to do the chase. So I've had to devote a ton of time to get to the bottom of the truth. It's much easier to get in there, make Tim Allen look bad, sell a couple of clicks. I think my experience with journalists has just been so poor. I just cannot believe they put you on camera and then edit it to misrepresent what you're saying intentionally with forethought. They sell their souls so cheaply. It's just amazing to me, and it happens again and again and again.
That's rife in all. I mean, there's things I should say and things I shouldn't, I suppose. But I worked in documentaries for a long time, and very high profile documentaries. And some of your favorite documentaries are literally a mishmash of cuts from different shoots over a period of 3 weeks.
Yes.
Cut together to make it look like it all happened on the same day. And that's kind of, I mean, recently that's now become something you have to talk about in the credits. Do you know what I mean? You have to mention, and I'm talking about even natural history programs here where you're watching things saying, this is the most incredible story I've ever seen. And it's like, yeah, it took a year to shoot. That's why it didn't happen in 3 days. Yeah. You know what I mean? And some of it happened in a studio, and some of it's a green screen, and, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of how a lot of people have sort of they've just kind of like drifted into this way of making content. Right. And the worst of it now is just YouTube, because there's no rules at all. There's no love lost if you just completely fabricate something now. Yeah. You know, people are all working for themselves. There's no one's accountable for anything unless you care. Obviously, if you care about your reputation, you do be accountable. And actually much easier when you're an individual, when you're working in a team. Like I say, I've found myself in situations in the past where I'm like, okay, this is slightly unethical, but I'm part of a team. And if I kick up a stink here, it's much worse for me, because there's 5 other people here who don't care. Right. And I'm going to be the arsehole. So what do? All right, I try to not be part of it, but you're part of it. If you're on a crew and you're out in the middle of Mongolia shooting a documentary and the director's doing this, that, and the other you don't like, what are you going to do? You just walk away? They need you. You're the cameraman, or you're the whatever, the sound guy, you know. It's part of this. It's systemic. It's really systemic, and it's. I think it's changing. I think people are now. The gatekeepers are disappearing, and that was one way you could hide all this stuff, obviously. Right. And information is free. You know, we're freeing information. The internet has freed information. It's been a radical revolution over the last 25 years. It's like, and also individuals are now empowered to be in control of their own reputation, which I think is really phenomenal. Because if you can be the boss of your own world, you should. Yeah, there's no question about it. As soon as you are working under the umbrella of an institution, an organization, a company, you will start basically turning a blind eye to some things. You have to. There's always something that you don't quite agree with, you know. And that is one of the advantages of the 21st century, I think. You can be a sole creator. You really can. I mean, you know, it's marvelous, really. You know?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about it is that if National Public Radio made a 30-second clip of our conversation, not only would it suck, it would misrepresent us. It would make us be enemies, or it would take a couple things out of context that make us more provocative. But that causes the audience to crave more depth, which is why the lamestream media has been shocked that everybody has switched over to podcasts like yours. We want to hear the 2-hour conversation of 2 guys just talking. Nobody editing it, real people talking. It's not fake. So everyone is switching to that. And I'm so excited that decentralized media is allowing people to see how much the mainstream media lies about what politicians say, about what CEOs say. Because I've known this since I published my first book. as soon as I was in the newspaper, they're willfully misrepresenting me. And how unethical it is, and you don't have a platform to respond. Because what people need to open their minds to is the media doesn't just lie about famous people who have a platform to respond. They also misrepresent Chad and Nadia and little people and the Seasteading Institute. So yes, I have a platform where I can say whatever I want. I can put out my own podcast, I can make my own video, and 10,000 people listen to it, but then 1 million people read the article that lies about us. 500,000 will watch that YouTube video that lies about us.
Yeah, but which million people? That's the important thing.
That's the important thing.
Yeah, I don't care. Like I don't even care what the mainstream or the legacy media do anymore, because I know who listens to them. They're too far gone, or they're not ready to hear this kind of stuff, and that's fine by me. I'm absolutely made my peace with that.
I have to be okay with being misrepresented. I was on a walk with a gentleman a few hours ago who said, "Oh yeah, I heard about this Chad and Nadia thing. Yeah, they parked their thing inside Thai territorial waters with in a shipping lane." And I'm like, "No, that's a lie." So that's the problem. You're already famous in the popular imagination for things that aren't true. And that's the thing you have to convey to people. The best way to laugh at mainstream media is to become the ongoing subject of it. And once it's happened 100 times, you got to go through the stages of rage and grief, and eventually you get to the place you're just laughing at what they say. But most people are not there. They're like, they don't even realize they have beliefs based on what they've read in newspapers. They have ideas about what happens based on what they've read in the media. And they're not biased. They're not slanted. They lie. They lie to the public over and over and over. They lie for a living.
But that is also a characteristic of people in general. And it's not just the media that gives you those presumptions that you don't challenge. I've been on last 2 years doing this podcast, I've been on a phenomenal journey. Democracy was a big one for me. It was only 4 or 5 months ago I realized, hold on a minute, this isn't the pinnacle of, governance, the democratic system, and I had to really think about that, because that's one of those, you can tell all those untouchable things that you're not allowed to challenge. That was a big one for me. And I'm open-minded, and I had never in 50 years of being alive thought to check it out, the alternatives, or check out what maybe it wasn't. I just took it on board. And there's hundreds of those things. And they're not the mainstream media. They're just pervasive. They're just out there,
I hereby recommend Frank Karsten as a podcast guest. He wrote a very short pamphlet that is brilliant about why democracy is terrible. And it just answers every question with 2-page answers. And you cannot get through that book without realizing, oh my God, why would anyone organize society this way? He's a friend, but I read his book before we became friends.
Well, I mean, it really is an all-pervasive thing. I mean, people, you can mobilize a nation by saying, protect our democracy. Literally. Yeah. That's how fucked people are, that you could literally, in this day and age, there may be a certain situation where the democratic process works. I don't know. I don't care anymore. It's not my concern. I've realized that there are some really interesting other ways to do it. Yeah. And they work better anyway. So even at small scale. So I'd rather do that anyway, But it's just, there are a number of things like that. And going back to being a journalist, when I was working for The Independent, I did think we were the good guys, and we were the good guys. We thought of the Daily Mail and people like that as the bad guys, because they really did lie. Their front pages it was like, can we get away with this? Can we get away with saying this? Whereas we never used to do that. We never used to think, I didn't anyway. I don't know what the big editors and the subs, maybe they did, but really it wasn't like, can we hurt these people? It was different. We were reporting on what we thought were proper, there's a lot of social justice, obviously, that kind of stuff. But still, I came out the other side, and then when I reflected on it, recently, I'm like, man, I was ideologically captured.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that I was. And because I'm almost certainly ideologically captured in a way now, but I'm on the lookout constantly for those things. Whereas back then there were these things you took for granted. And democracy's one. Is a all-pervasive thing that you take for granted. And it's every day you hear about it on the news, or people, thank God we live in a democracy. Oh, look, they're over there, they haven't got democracy. That and it's amazing. It's like it's like hypnotism.
Yeah,
it really is.
Because we're propagandized when we're in school to think this is the pinnacle of human achievement. And what was it, Mark Twain, who said, if you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to stop and reconsider? The good thing to me about democracy is that it opens you to the idea of seasteading. That's why we say things like, well, what if you could vote with your house? Yeah. What if you could move and take your property with you? If you want to choose your leaders, what if you could choose your own government? What if there are as many governments as you want? You can move around and choose it. I think in my book, I refer to it as we're upgrading democracy from each individual voting on who rules us all to the ultimate minority, who is the individual, being able to vote with their house and choose the government they want. So mobile city blocks, mobile communities, moving around like cruise ships and choosing among a market of governance is the solution to the governance problem that is making the world psychotic, and always has made the world psychotic. And it encourages the part of human nature that wants to profit by serving others, and discourages the part of human nature that is able to profit by exploiting others by getting some kind of power in the state.
It only works with a captive audience. That's the thing, doesn't it? That whole system only works with a captive audience. If you're the state, people have to be, you have to keep people.
Yes.
You have to stop them from leaving, basically.
Yeah.
And they do it softly with rules and regs and exit taxes and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And if it gets bad, they put up a wall to stop you going. I mean, it's so insidious. I don't know whether you were listening to the talks yesterday, but
I was.
Did you hear Nikos's talk?
My favorite.
I interviewed him on this podcast in Poland about a year and a half ago. Right, I love that guy. He has such a way of making you enraged about the system. And one of the things he said this time, it was so perfect. He said, imagine being a creative who has to run by all their creations, to run them by someone else before they sort of like, so if you're a painter, you paint a picture and then someone looks at it and says, no, maybe not, you'd better change that a bit before you go out. He said, now imagine you're one of the other creative industries, the entrepreneurs. That's literally what they have to do.
Yeah.
Every time they come up with an idea, they have to run it by a regulator who's someone you don't like, you don't respect, who adds no value of themselves, and basically want some money off you for the privilege. I mean, how
and doesn't like you because you can do it.
Exactly. I mean, how horrendous is that? And but the way he managed to, I love it when people word things in ways like that, because it's very easy to say, oh, tax is theft and fuck the state and all this kind of stuff. But when you put it like that, it's like, it's enraging when you think about these people who, like, in any other medium, you would have nothing to do with these people. You would say, whatever, these are people I don't want to associate with. And actually, they're the ones who basically rule your life, make it hard, take money from you.
Yeah.
Every time you do something, every time you spend, every time you save, every time someone dies, every time you sell your house, the hand comes out. Give me some. Give me some. For what?
With a gun in the other hand.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God. It's like, I went through a big learning curve with money, from learning about Bitcoin when I first learned. And it took me probably 5 or 6 years to realize money's a scam.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. And then it was another 6 years. And it was like governance the state is a scam. It's unbelievable. What am I going to get next? What's happening next?
There's a lot. The next thing is seasteading, because you got to get past the outrage. Like, yes, the money system is just a giant anemic drain on the potential of the distributed intelligence of humanity to solve all sorts of problems. If there wasn't that system, we'd be on Mars by now and we'd have Seasteads by now. It just drains off all the creativity of people, and it's just force. But that's been since the dawn of time. There's always been a situation where things are prospering and parasites go in to take advantage of it. Our very bodies are that. Matter of fact, that's a good analogy. Most of the cells in our bodies are parasites, but we've evolved symbiotic relationships with them. So now they're kind of working for us.
Who's we in that context?
All animals.
What do you mean, our soul or what? Because,
No, we have cells in our body that have our DNA, and we have more cells that are other creatures that just sort of live inside us, that over time we've developed symbiotic relationships with. And I think of this as a relationship between Seasteads and the state in the future. If we have distributed networks of mobile governance providers and customers moving around and attaching and detaching, you can think of that as like a primal soup. And you can they would, hopefully, if we can scale them up quickly, as I plan, very quickly, to 100,000 in a decade, if we can scale these up, they'll win hearts and minds because they'll have, you can think of them as analogous to cruise ships. People aren't hostile towards cruise ships, at least not to the extent that the state goes after them. So if you think of cruise ships have a relationship with the parasitic state that's symbiotic. So does the Cayman Islands. The U.S. doesn't invade the Cayman Islands. The Cayman Islands has some sort of financial freedom. It's sort of rebellious against the U.S., but it has a symbiotic relationship with the U.S. This even works off the coast of socialist Venezuela. Trinidad and Tobago, very free market, say the most free market islands in the Caribbean. That's arguable. It's like 6 miles from the coast of Venezuela. Why don't they just invade it and take it? There's nothing to take except the freedom that allows people to prosper. It's not a resources type of place. So this is going on all over the world. Now imagine if you could float thousands of these things. You would very rapidly start developing all sorts of solutions we can't imagine, all sorts of creativity that we can't imagine. These would be platforms for human acceleration that wouldn't be controlled by the state. So there would be a natural evolutionary process, literally natural selection going on, variation and selection among people choosing governance providers. So you'd set off evolution in governance itself if you could move your houses and your city blocks and your cities around and choose what you want, the same way cruise ships do, the same way all the wealthy people here do. They move since they can move around, they're less taxed. So this could easily be scaled up very rapidly.
The concern I have, though, is that there's not even that many land-based people that are looking for freedom, in a sense, let alone people who might think. I mean, it's an acquired taste, isn't it? Living on the sea.
It sure is.
I don't know. I mean, do you ever wonder whether you might be screaming about seasteading and then it's like 200 years in the future that it actually happens? Do you know what I mean? Like,
that's what I thought when I wrote the book, or I thought 50 years. Now I'm thinking next year.
Really?
Because it's analogous to the American frontier. Virtually everyone in the Eastern, first of all, everyone in Europe is like, why would you go to the North American colonies? There's just nothing there. It's way more exciting and convenient to live here. I don't want to grow my own food. But people that are fed up moved there. But then they established a monopoly and a gerontocracy. And then so who the hell wants to go out into the Native American country and set up log cabins? Virtually nobody. Except for Chad and Nadia, the Chad and Nadia of the 16th century, 17th century. It starts with the pioneers who are driven to do something new, the early adopters. And they go out there and build their seastead or their log cabin. They get attacked by the natives, as Chad and Nadia were. They have to run away. But then someone like Grant comes along and builds a more luxury seastead, or somebody goes out onto the frontier in the North America and builds a farm that's armed with a fence around it. And then pretty soon they need to hire people. Pretty soon you need a hardware store. Pretty soon you need someone to babysit the kids while you milk the cows. So it starts with those early adopters, the fanatics, the pioneers. Look, if there's a Chad and Nadia, then there's a Grant. If there's a Grant, then there's the next stage of people. There's the next customer who's like, I don't know, it seems kind of cool, but I don't want to live there. Maybe I just want to try a short trip. Well, that's why the first business is probably going to be a CB&B, a name coined by Titus Gable that we've all been repeating ever since. Go out there and stay there for a day. Stay one night. Try the underwater room. See what you think. Take cell phone videos. Post it on Instagram. I think you can win hearts and minds very quickly.
That is actually what happened to Grant, isn't it? Grant saw, he told me the story. I think it was somewhere in Canada where they had, for an exhibition, they'd created these concrete floating homes. Mm-hmm. I think they were near Toronto. I forget where he said. And he saw them and he went to live on one for a weekend as an Airbnb. And then he rented it for 3.5 years. And that's how he basically realized. I think he met you after that period of time living on the thing, which is obviously what primed him for the notion, you know. Yeah,
there were only 22 floating homes in Canada on that side of Canada. The reason they weren't allowed to build anymore is because people were claiming, oh, they're not homes, I don't have to do property taxes.
Yeah.
So the government said no.
Thanks.
But Grant designed his own interior, lived in it, meditated on the roof, and used to commute by kayak through freezing Canadian waters. So yeah, he was already in love with living on the ocean, very close to land, before he met me. And then once I'm describing half the Earth's surface is unclaimed by any nation, almost 2/3 of it are places where you can get a lot of freedom if you go more than 12 miles out. And you can move these around and to detach and form bigger communities. Yeah, he was getting all that right out of the gate. And no matter how deep I took it, he was getting it all very fast. So people, I'm sure Grant told you all about it. People don't understand how pleasurable it is to live on the sea. And people pay millions of dollars for oceanfront property. Now, what would you pay for 360-degree view? Chad and Nadia used to watch the sunrise and the sunset the same day when they were living on their tin can in the middle of the ocean. Now go to the underwater room, 360-degree aquarium view. You're in the aquarium and the fish look at you. And the coral reef is growing on your home. You're still telling me this is roughing it? You know what's roughing it? Living on land where there's mudslides and earthquakes and crime.
No, but in the case of Grant's seastead, I probably would like to live on, where it's moored at the moment next to that little island. Yeah, I'd like a beachfront property there. I'm not sure that I care about a 360 view. I get all the talking points, but I think it takes a specific kind of person. This is why I wonder whether people are ready en masse or in large numbers for those kind of experiences. If you tell me you could create a floating island that felt a little bit like an island, mm-hmm. I think that's something that you could populate very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But I think it takes a certain type of person to live, the way Grant lives.
Sure.
It's incredible. He's a unique guy.
But there's more out there. It takes a certain kind of person to get that big brick of a mobile phone that doesn't sound good, that you're going to pay all that money for. But somebody does it, and then they start driving down the price until we all have these tiny little mobile phones with every kind of app on it we can imagine. Now, the jump between that giant brick of a mobile phone to the tiny mobile phones we have now that can do everything we want is a much bigger journey than the SeaPod to a floating island that looks like a resort where you don't get seasick. That's going to be a short thing to get to, because you can scale up to that very quickly, especially near the equator where waves are low. Mm. I don't have any doubt what Ocean Builders has achieved and what ArcPet has achieved is they have provided the minimal viable product. Now, ArcPad, they're selling their first ArcPads for $165K a year. We're here by ArcPad is competitive with oceanfront property. Matter of fact, they're beating it.
$165K, not a year, right?
Oh, excuse me, to buy the whole thing.
Yeah. I know. I mean, interestingly, Grant said, I said, what's the business model here? Because his prototype cost him $6 million. Do you remember the $6 Million Man, actually? Do you remember that program?
I sure do. I watched it every Sunday.
It's funny, it was $6 million. He said, I said, so you're going to start selling them to, I don't know, high net worth individuals or people in Dubai who want to put one out in the backyard kind of thing. And he said that he wasn't going to until they could get their costs down to like 1.2, I think, or 1.3 million, he said. That's kind of still pretty expensive. I mean, it's a certain type of person that's going to buy that, right? What do you imagine they come down to in the future? I mean, does it? Because the thing about these kind of technology is, like, you can see it with boats. The price of boats hasn't come down that much, has it? I mean, what do you pay? You still pay hundreds of thousands of pounds for a boat, right? A decent boat.
A sailboat?
Yeah.
You can get much less than $100,000.
Can you?
Yeah. There's all sorts. I mean, there's everything. You can get a cheap little sailboat that's worth less than your car.
Can you?
And then you can start get fancier and fancier sailboats for bigger and bigger waves. You can go all the way up to the yacht.
So you reckon there'll be second-hand Seasteads?
Sure.
That are kind of like my first Seastead or something.
Yeah, I mean, you can start out with I'm sure the first boats were expensive to make for lots of people. You can make any kind of version of anything. So you can they have the first product, and they're going to drive the price down to make it cheaper and cheaper. But there's only one sea pillar. I describe it as a sea pillar, the spar that floats. But if you do 4 and put a platform on top of it, now you have a table floating. Now it's even more stable. Now you can sell it to a community of, say, 100 people, or a business like a medical research business that wants to get 12 miles out and do less expensive medical research.
My other thought, after thinking about it, was that one of the biggest markets, potentially at the beginning, for the individual pods would be just offshore cities, or because a lot of cities are built on nice little peninsulas or even sort of sheltered areas and stuff like that. That would make sense as long as the bloody regulators don't come in and say you can't put that there, or you can't do this, or you can't do that, because they, unfortunately, as we saw with the last time Canada had floating boats, they just stopped the idea. Sorry, floating.
Sure.
They'll almost certainly come in and stop the idea again, because someone sitting in an office in a government who doesn't add value and is nasty and not very nice will just look at it and go, nope.
Sure.
We can't leech off it.
Which is why the next phase of seasteading is absolutely vital. So they can do that out to 12 miles. 12.1 miles, they can't do that.
But won't they just change the rules?
Well, they'd have to do that by international treaty.
United Nations?
Yeah, okay. In order to stop the first seastead, they can go to the United Nations and petition to extend territorial waters. But that's going to take a while. I mean, it's always tyranny versus freedom, and you're always in a race. Yeah. So a country can't unilaterally change the rules unless there may be the U.S. But why would they bother? It takes some work, it takes time, it takes money, it takes effort.
So how long do you think people will leave you alone out to sea in the coming 100 years? So do you think they'll ever start saying
we have to follow the same trend as cruise ships. So first, it's a bunch of rich people with butlers who take cruises. The nerve of these people. And then you start scaling these things up, making different versions. Next thing you know, my grandparents are on one, and everybody loves them. And you have Disney cruises, and they win the hearts and minds of people. So that's what you have to do. You got to scale it up. Look, all the digital technologies that have worked in Silicon Valley worked by scaling up faster than regulators could stop it. So they already start getting customers and start getting excited. If you look at PayPal, that's what they did. What was it, like the Louisiana regulators or something swooped in and said, "Oh, we're redefining you as a bank. You have to do this, do that." And they said, "Well, 100,000 people in Louisiana are already using our service. So you want us to shut down all those customers? How many votes is that?" And then they change their minds, because by the time they wake up and try to figure out what they can do about it, there are hundreds of thousands of people that already use it. The U.S. can just change the rules for the Cayman Islands. They have no standing army. There's nothing they can do. There's tens of thousands of people who live there. But people in the U.S. are already using the Cayman Island services. They don't want to shut that down, including powerful people who are in the government. So that's how you do it. At any time, look, the arguments against seasteading at this point are the arguments against attempts at freedom itself. So people are now objecting, well, the government could just come with a nuclear bomb and get you. Absolutely. They can kill you anytime they want. But you got to move faster. You got to move fast, and you got to do it. And I guess we're just not afraid, because the Thai government tried to kill us. They didn't try to kill me, but I might be listed on the death threat. But they tried to kill Chad and Nadia. And look, they're building Seasteads again in a different country. They switched to a different country. So more U-boats could come, more countries could order, but I don't think they're going to bother the same way they don't sink cruise ships, the same way they don't attack the Cayman Islands, the same reason socialist Venezuela doesn't attack free market Trinidad and Tobago.
I hope so, obviously. I'm just thinking it through, and I know that seasteads and cruise ships are similar, but on the whole, well, I suppose cruise ships are very mobile, right? And that's a big factor when you think about it. It's one thing to have a cruise liner come through, dock, do business with you, buy things from you, and then sail away. It's another thing to have something out there on the horizon, sat there, taking all your business, like literally competing with you. Cruise ships aren't competing with Rio de Janeiro when they dock there, are they? They're actually adding to it, those kind of things. And I know you're going to say, well, the seasteads are adding, but really they're coming in to compete with the government, aren't they?
The cruise ships compete. So if you're in a coastal hotel, have you ever been on a cruise ship?
I haven't, no.
So everyone experiences this. I'm in a coastal hotel. I'm paying this much money. It's a crappy little hotel. I get out of the hotel. I grab my bags. I board the cruise ship. I get in a room that's smaller, but it's cheaper per night than that crappy hotel. The food is better. There's 10,000 times more amenities, and I have my own personal butler. Why is this cheaper place to stay so much better than the crappy hotel I was just staying on last night?
Okay.
So they're directly competing with hotels. They're competing with old age homes. People have figured out putting my grandma on in a old folks home on land is much more expensive, and she doesn't really get cared for. Put her on a cruise ship all year round. She gets taken care of. It's less expensive. It's still expensive.
That's a great life hack.
People are doing it. People are doing it like crazy.
I've never thought of that before. Because you're right. You get, how many staff are there per person on a cruise ship? It's something ridiculous.
It depends on the cruise ship. That's the other thing, the variety of things that are offered in the market of cruise ships. And look, we have a minimal viable product that's much cheaper. And so imagine if you didn't have to come into port, if you didn't have to deal with the land governments at all, which cruise ships do.
But why aren't cruise ships looking down this route then? Is it just because their business model works and they don't want to do it, or are they? They're
the fastest growing travel industry in the world. They're raking in the cash like no other business you can think of. I think they are looking towards this. I was asked to speak on The World, which is a cruise ship that travels the world and people live on it full time, or at least they have, some people live on it full time, and some people just have a condo. They visit once in a while, or they're there 6 months out of the year, or 3 months out of the year, or 8 months out of the year. They have all different size things they offer. They had me go on that thing and do 3 talks, each an hour long, on different subjects. And I got to go on there and say, you're the world's first priesthood. You are it. You are what we're talking about. Imagine if you didn't have to go to land at all. What if you could stay out here?
What did they say to that, though? Did they think that was a good... Because this is the bit where I get stuck with Seasteads. All your arguments and your talking points, I agree with. But the thing that is I'm not sure about is, well, me, and I'm an anecdote here, but I would like to be on land. I wouldn't necessarily like to be at sea. That's why I haven't taken a cruise ship before. And also, I mean, lots of people do, yeah? Lots of people do take cruise ships. But is it enough to kind of kickstart a movement to get to that point where more land-loving people would entertain the idea of seasteads, as in, these far, I don't know how distant in the future, these kind of really big seastead projects, which are more like floating islands, I suppose you would say, because there aren't, I mean, how many, there can't be that many people on cruise ships, and I would imagine, and I mean this, I'm just thinking out loud here, but cruise ships have a lot of older folk that travel on them. Are they likely? Isn't the social aspect, the kind of being looked after, that side of it is an important aspect of the cruise ship, which in a way, with SeaPods, it's much more of a young person's game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. I love the idea, and it has clicked for me, for sure. I get it. It's like, yeah, this is for real. I feel like one day it will be ubiquitous, like you say. I just don't know how quickly that is. You're very optimistic. I think it could be 100 years. I think to myself, it could be like, people like, what you're saying is all correct, but it could be 100 years too early or something. You know what I mean?
I thought so when I started to get into it, and the more this all keeps coming together, I realized actually it's going to happen very quickly, and it needs to happen quickly if we're going to outrace the rise of the surveillance state. I think your grandchildren are going to take a plane to a seastead or a personal drone, and they're going to land on it and be hanging out with their friends, and they're like, oh, am I on a seastead? Or is this an island? I don't know. I don't know the difference anymore. Whatever. I travel around to different things. They're just going to take it for granted because by that time it will scale up to be big things that has all kinds of stuff. You don't have to be a sailor. The other thing is, right now, like last year, a population equivalent to Taiwan boarded cruise ships, a population bigger than Texas. It's like between 20 and 25 million people board cruise ships every year to essentially vacation in private governance at sea. They don't understand why it's better, but it's better because it's private governance. That's why they can do so much and provide all kinds of crazy stuff.
And that's the most compelling argument for seasteading that I think is out there. When you say that, I'm like 100%. They don't even realize they're living in a private governance system. And that's great, because that's kind of what you want. I think the way, when I think about it, I'm looking at the timeline of events, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you need the capital input of these kind of individual seasteads initially in order to make your way to the big ones, right?
Yes. So you need the minimal viable product that's realistically going to be bought. So in a week, I'm going to head to Saudi Arabia and maybe try to sell some SeaPods to sheiks.
That'll work easy. The first time, as soon as I was talking to Grant, I said, have you been to Dubai yet, mate? I'm almost certain they'll buy a bunch of them at 6 million. They don't care. They'll put them out, and there'll be Airbnbs. There'll be one guy who'll buy one, a bit like, they buy cars. Once you can afford the biggest car in the world, it becomes about something else. Is it an A number plate? Is it A1, A2? That's what costs the money, not the car. Yeah. So with the seastead, if you're the only one with one of them, I'm almost certain they'll go for it.
So yeah, it'll start as a status symbol. Simultaneously, I'll walk you through. I'll describe for you the future.
Go on then.
Okay, in the next few years, there's going to be SeaPods and ArcPads floating. Some people are going to buy them as a status symbol, or because they think it's cool, or because they want to be alone. This will happen simultaneously on both sides of the earth. Okay, Seasteads are already off and running faster than the state can control it. Simultaneously, there's going to be CB&Bs. Nadia always wanted to run an underwater restaurant. So there'll be people just trying it out once in a while. There already are people staying on the SeaPods, trying it out and making videos and posting it on Instagram. Pretty soon they're going to get even fancier and even bigger and go even further out to sea. You'll take a drone out there, you'll take a sailboat out there, you'll take a helicopter out there, try it out. It's pretty cool. Eventually someone says, I want to live on one of these. By 2035, we'll have dozens of them on different parts of the world, maybe some in Saudi Arabia, maybe some in Panama, maybe some in the Philippines, running different kinds of business. You're diving, you're snorkeling around it. It's ecotourism. They naturally attract life to them. If it's out there for 10 years, you're going to have a fabulous coral garden growing right outside your window. You can sell people. You can let people. You can run a business from your. Come on out. I'll stay in the underwater room. You stay in the top room. You can scuba dive around. There are decommissioned oil rigs that make money just letting people scuba dive around it, because anything you float on the sea automatically attracts all the sea life, and it's incredibly beautiful. Seasteads will have those very rapidly. Won't take long before one of these Vitalia investors says, that's where we need to go to run our life extension medical research. Any place in the U.S. where right now people drive down to Mexico to get cheaper plastic surgery, cheaper knee operations. What if it was just off the coast of L.A.? People wouldn't take a ferry out there to get their knee operation at 1/10 the price?
No, but this is at the point when I think the state will start getting nasty. As soon as there's direct competition like that, I think that's when people, the parasitic class, will go, we need to do something about this. Because whenever the state gets challenged to be more competitive, their response is never to get better. It's always to regulate. It's always to stop it or to lay down the law. And that would be the point for me, where they're like, someone who owns a plastic surgery business on Rodeo Drive is complaining in my ear. What can we do about these annoying gits off the coast of,
So let's assume every worst case scenario happens. So someone sets up a knee operation thing off the coast of LA that's 1/10 the price. The United States finds an excuse to shut it down. But there's another one in Brazil. There's another one off the coast of Monaco. Knock yourself out. Each of these states has to act individually, and it's hard to get if you're running an industry, it's hard to get the state to do what you want. I think most of this will just be going on quietly. It's not like the medical industry in the U.S. over the border of Mexico, like in San Diego or something, is all angry that some of their patients are headed to Mexico to get the same medical services, to get the same drugs. Why isn't the pharmaceutical industry doing something about that? There's all sorts of competition.
Is there anyone on a cruise ship doing medical tourism?
There is. I should know this because my wife is basically in the industry. But like plastic surgery type stuff
on boats.
On boats, yeah.
And does it benefit from any kind of regulation specific to a boat or something?
Yes. As a matter of fact, they sell a whole service where you get to stay out there while you're recovering, so no one sees you with bandages on your face. You're on a boat load of people with bandages on their face, all slowly recovering, enjoying a vacation. Right?
I love it. You can just imagine that scene, all these people walking around like zombies.
Like weaker governments that can't defend themselves already make most of their money competing with the big nation right next door that could stop them anytime they want, but they don't. It's very hard to threaten a big government. They have to actually care enough to do something about it. There are so many examples. So it won't be long before people are just living out there. And then it's people who run seaweed farms have already reached out to us, not even knowing much about seasteading, being like, I can imagine in 5 years, I'm going to need a dormitory of workers out there. One of them is close to the Philippines. And I was saying, Mitchell with ArcPad could provide a dormitory for workers, probably pretty cheaper to work your sea farm. You and I aren't going to take that job. Poor people in the Philippines will take that job, just like people from the developing world take jobs on cruise ships, because it's better. It's better than being on land. People are already choosing the ocean because it's better, because they can get outside their corrupt governments. Where do we go from there? Once you have a seaweed farm and you have workers working out there, people who want to homeschool, people who want to do any kind of business where they want to get outside the regulations of the existing state. I'll tell you what, a guy who worked for the pharmaceutical industry reached out to me and spoke to me many times repeatedly saying, look, my company, I can't name names or name companies. He asked me not to. He's like, my company will spend $1 billion to produce one damn drug. He's like, and it's all basically the regulations that make it more expensive. If we could do this on a seastead just for a couple of months, just to narrow down the potentials of where these experiments are going to go with our animal trials or whatever, or with human cells outside the jurisdiction, then we know where we're going. Then we can come back to the US and go through all the rules, going through the whole expensive process, but still knowing where we're going, where a lot of the errors have already been eliminated on a seastead. You could save my company $100 million.
But here's another fly in the ointment, and you've kind of just alluded to it a little bit there, that there will be things done 21 miles outside of, off the coast of California, say, which a lot of people don't agree with. And they will think that should be stopped. Like even just mentioned animal trials, right? Animal trials are legal in pharmaceuticals, we all know it, but a lot of people really hate it. They don't think it's very fair, and that's so it's a motive. Now you imagine, and I had this question actually. I've just written it down here. Maybe you can answer it through this. What do in Prospera, for example? They basically have sort of regulatory capacity to make their own regulations, but obviously everything else is about the Honduran government. Criminal law, this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. If you're 21 miles outside of a country, is it completely lawless? I mean, do you even have to think about anything?
No, it's not completely lawless. It's just if you're 12 miles out, 99% of laws don't apply. But a lot of criminal law applies, and you can't smuggle, you can't drill the seabed. It's just very basic laws.
And is that based on the flag on your ship or whatever?
Yes, basically.
And so seasteads will have to have a flag.
Initially. Now, the thing you need to explain to the land folk is that a maritime flag is a completely different kind of legal entity than a territorial flag, even though they look exactly alike. So technically, I always talk about, say, a cruise ship flagged in the Bahamas, leaves from Panama, goes on an Alaskan cruise, takes 10,000 people up there. While they're up in Alaska, an American gets drunk and gets in a fight with an employee who's from the Philippines. Somebody gets injured. There's a sexual assault. An old lady is so disturbed by this fight, has a heart attack, drops dead. Okay, the complexity of what's happening here, first of all, the U.S. takes a proprietary view of the American. The Filipino guy probably doesn't have the same kind of rights, but he's also on a ship. The old lady all these people have different insurance companies. They're under different jurisdictions. How does that work? How would that work? It does work. This goes on every day on cruise ships. There's fights, there's deaths. Murders have happened, crimes have happened. It all works out because it's evolved over time and it's scaled up and it's integrated all these different overlapping jurisdictions on one cruise ship. I'll tell you what, they can't call 911 back to Panama and say, quick, cops, come rescue us. They have to deal with that, the private security on the ship. The captain is functionally a dictator. He absolutely can say, lock that guy in the brig, don't let him out for the rest of the trip, don't feed him any food. He can do whatever he wants. He can, and as really happens, they'll abandon you on a obscure island. The captain could say, that was the second time you got drunk, you're off the ship. Figure out your own thing. Sue me in Bahamas court.
Are you saying that that's literally entrenched in law, in maritime law? Or is that just the fact that you're on a private ship and it's tough shit? You kind of signed a contract with you.
It's sort of in admiralty law. So whenever you say literally, it's always a lot more complicated than the simple way I'm saying it. But yes, the captain functions within a tremendous amount of power. Now, you're British. Back in the, a century ago, the captain could have you flogged. But why don't they flog the workers now? Well, because now we have a market of customers. If you have me flogged or you make me walk the plank, I can go write a negative Amazon review. And then my boss at the cruise line is saying, what the hell is going on our ship? You're supposed to keep our customers happy. Now they're going to switch to our competitor. It's like, I really want to be a tyrant, though. I guess I have to be a good, wise leader, and I have to be so good at providing governance, nobody on the ship even talks about the politics.
It has to be said, Joe, that the seasteading model, or the cruise shipping model, is literally the best way to explain private governance to someone in existence. It really is. There's no better way to show people that, and I'm not even talking that it can work on land. I mean, it's so easy to understand. When you talk to people about private cities and all this kind of stuff, a lot of people are like, whoa, that sounds horrendous. Who's going to look, how do we know they're not going to kill and maim and be dictators and all this kind of stuff? And it's like, but that model is literally by far the best way to explain it.
Yes, I abso-fucking-lutely. So it's very powerful that free private cities have flourished on the ocean, not on land.
I know. That's the one thing they can't move.
There are hundreds of them on the ocean right now.
Yes.
And, people have their stereotypes about cruise ships, but the variety of what they provide. I've been on the giant Alaskan cruise ship that's as big as a city, that's better than any town I've ever been in, with more amenities than I can imagine. I've also been on the National Geographic tour for outdoorsmen, which is small, and you got to get off the boat and go on big hikes, and you got to put on a wetsuit and dive. It's for hardcore outdoorsmen. At the same time, in my talk today, I showed cruise ships pulling out of port one after another, and I'm saying each of those is a self-governing private city. Why aren't they shooting at each other? They're leaving from Florida. Florida seized control of the free private city of Disney World. California controls Disneyland, not Disney Cruises. One Disney cruise after another is leaving from Florida. They don't provoke the immune system of the state. Disneyland does, Disney World does, Disney Cruises does not. Disney Cruises is so safe that people trust their children with a dictator. And they let their kids run around on this thing, and it's like, well, what if the kids get hurt? They're not going to get hurt. Well, but there's no regulations. Like I have a picture I show where the water slide that the kids can take goes out over the sea and comes back in. Yeah. It looks completely unsafe. Like, what if that breaks? It's just a see-through plastic thing to scare the kids. Why don't the parents say, like, well, whose safety regulations are these? It's called market regulations. And Disney Cruises is a self-governing thing that runs their own regulations. They don't want the kids to die. There's a market incentive for the kids not to die.
Is that true, though?
Is what true?
About regulations?
Again, it's complicated. So I wouldn't be surprised if the ship is, say, maybe it's where it's built is complicated, but say it's built in Singapore, and then you go to one of the certification societies that certify this thing as safe. I don't know Disney cruises specifically, but I know ships choose which certification society certifies their ships as safe. So they are the regulators, right? There's like 50 of them. They're all competing. So I want their stamp on my ship saying that it's safe because that's good in the market. Each of those certifiers wants to provide good regulations so that the ship lines keep choosing me to be the certifier. All I'm selling is my reputation to guarantee safety. Everybody's willing to pay each other. Everyone's competing to push prices down, and nobody gets on a cruise ship saying, well, this thing's unsafe. My roads in the U.S. aren't safe. Why don't the regulators protect me from that? My drugs in the U.S. aren't safe. Why don't the regulators protect me from that? Buildings burned down with people partying inside in my city. Why didn't the fire regulators protect us from that? Why doesn't that happen on cruise ships? Because they have a monopoly over regulations, so there's no incentive to improve or to make it cheap. On the ocean, there are competing regulators known as certification societies. There's competing cruise lines, dictatorships that compete with each other to serve customers. And all these patriotic people step off their country and onto a free private floating city. They don't change their ideology, and it doesn't occur to them that they don't have to vote on this thing. They just have to choose, and it automatically improves.
It is such a good example of all these theories, all this kind of, why would you ever want to vote on the way that your cruise ship is run?
There's no democracy on a cruise ship.
Exactly. Is it a good product? Yes. Okay, I will use it. Is it a bad product? Yes. Right. I'm going to go and use that one then.
Yeah.
That's it. That's literally the model.
Yeah.
It's like the fact that people don't think, the fact that people struggle with the idea of that on land is mind-boggling when you put it in those terms.
When their parents already go on cruise ships.
Yes.
And a lot of people say, as I say, those big crowded ones with everything on it and every amenity and endless troughs of free food. Ugh, it's disgusting. I hate it. But that National Geographic cruise, I loved that one. The trip to Alaska where I got to get off and go see the bald eagles and row in a kayak up the Alaskan River, I loved that one. So there's all these different opportunities, these different, what should we call them? Products for different types of people that want to enjoy different kinds of experiences. And you don't get seasick unless there's a big storm. And that's the way the seasteads are better. Because you do get, if there's a storm and there's high waves on a cruise ship, you're going to get seasick. And then everyone's writing bad reviews and they're barfing on your ship. But on a SeaPod with deep ballast in high waves, we expect those to be seasick free.
As in oil rigs, which don't move around a lot in very high winds, even really ginormous waves.
And they build those for the North friggin' Sea.
I know, one of the worst seas in the world.
Yeah, and we want to build ours for the best seas in the world, for seasteading. Tell me your next objection, your next doubt.
Well, like I say, my doubt is that we're not traditionally a world culture of seafaring people. It's a minority thing. That's all. That's why I love the idea of seasteading, because it explains the principles of what, say, Titus is trying to do on land perfectly, except the downside to the land version is you can't leave when the state comes in to basically say, no, we own this now. Whereas on a floating city, you can. And I think probably the floating city version of the Seastead is the most perfect example of a private governance model that you could probably have on Earth, probably, unless we get anti-gravity technology and you can take it up into the sky and do it.
Yeah, we have anti-gravity technology. It's floating on the ocean.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Humans have been a seagoing people since they were Homo erectus. My grandparents, every grandparent in the United States or in any of the Americas, North and South, came over on a boat. People have been getting on boats and going places. It's been a symbol of freedom since before we had writing. People have been moving and running away from the monopoly governments on land since the dawn of time. And all the places where governance. So look, human nature, we're a tribal species. I don't think it's interesting. Are we evil? Are we good? Well, we're both. We're very complex. What we are is a family species. Family comes first. This is what human nature is. So if I can exploit you to serve my family, I'm going to do it. If I have power in a state and I can profit from taxing you or controlling you, I'm going to do it. It's going to make my family prosperous. But if the only way I can get prosperous is to serve a stranger, then that's what I'm going to have to do, right? So if you're stuck, land fundamentally, inevitably leads to a monopoly on governance. And then once you have a monopoly, more and more people are trying to get into that government to make things happen for them and their families. That's human nature. Now, if I can prosper by serving you in a marketplace through voluntary interactions, then I'm going to have to do that. But on the ocean, there is no way to get a monopoly on governance. You need that static land that you can win a war and then climb to the top of that bloody hierarchy and control other people. That's what democracy is. It's farming people, taxing people. It's a farm. And so we think we're free, but half of our working time is going straight to the state. But on the ocean, if people can move around, then governance becomes a product. And the only way I can prosper is by serving customers. So this is how we get to a place where people don't even think about politics. They don't even think about voting. They don't argue about it at all. They're just trying to prosper and serve and enjoy creativity as they already do on the ocean and on cruise ships.
It's absolutely true. I mean, you see a version of that in Dubai right now, in the Emirates. No one's voting there. It's 90% immigrants living there. It's only 10% of people that live in the Emirates that are Emiratis or in Dubai. And no one's voting. They're just getting a great product, and they will keep staying there while the product's good. You don't, like you say, you don't complain to, Samsung. You don't want to vote how Samsung make phones. You buy an Apple phone. You just buy a different brand. It's like But something I just thought of, because I've written down the word Elon here. Do you ever get the feeling that one day, if we won't be alive, but people, when they look back, when they're writing the history books, they'll look back and they'll see seasteading as a stepping stone to intergalactic living?
Absolutely. We're definitely going to the oceans before we go to Mars. We're going to beat Elon to the oceans. And Elon is already a seasteader. He doesn't know he is. Elon, if you're listening to this podcast, I assume you are. Give me a call. I've been waiting. So
no, but honestly, before you go on, if you had an hour sit down with Elon Musk, what would you try and talk about?
I would say, well, you know why you didn't build your companies in South Africa. You had to move to a country founded on the principle of fuck you. That's what the United States is founded on. Go fuck yourself. And which he famously said to the world.
That was amazing, wasn't it?
Yes. And that's what Americans have been doing since the dawn of time. That's why we're armed. That's why we're the most libertarian country in the world. That's why very nearly 1% of us believe in freedom. Which is a huge number of people. He moved from South Africa to the United States in order to escape government. He moved his company from California to Texas to escape government. He moved his launch site from Texas to Florida to escape politics. He moved from Florida to the ocean to escape regulation. He's built platforms on the sea. A lot of the incentive of that was to get outside jurisdictions. He's not the only one. Other people have launched from the sea decades ago in order to get outside of state regulations. That's not the only reason. You also want people to be safe. But, it was crazy what he was dealing with. They're like, well, the noise might hurt a whale if it's happening to go by. You have to test on a sea lion and see if we deafen it on land while you strap it down to a board. It's real stories that they had to deal with. So guys like him are in a constant race. If he couldn't switch among different governments, we wouldn't have rockets going to Mars. We wouldn't have these companies. Every government is trying to exploit what he's creating. And he just keeps moving. And he's gone all the way to the sea. And he's landing in the sea.
I've got one for you. Tesla.
Tesla?
Tesla. Take it to him. Well, he's got all these companies, hasn't he? The Boring Company, which I think is a phenomenal name for
an interesting company.
No, yeah. But I mean, he's got a lot on his plate. But I mean, it would be phenomenal if someone with that much capital took a liking to a notion like this. And it's almost, the elevator pitch is almost ready-made, isn't it? Like the stepping stone to the, like you can try out all the governance, you can try out all these things before, you do it out there. Because it's roughly the same. In fact, except it's a lot safer down on the sea.
Yeah.
And cheaper.
NASA already trains its astronauts under the water. You can simulate anti-gravity environments by going down under the water. They already feed their astronauts with algae stuff. I mean, I can go on and on. Everything people talk about they're going to get in space is in the ocean. And I'm not the only one saying this. They want to take rockets to asteroids to get the rare earth minerals. There are rare earth nodules on the surface of the ocean floor, very deep. Pure rare earth worth tons of money. You just have to deal with the pressure and get down there and do it. There's already companies trying to do it. You dream about intelligent life out on Mars or out in some distant quasar. There is intelligent life in the deep sea that we completely don't understand. Cephalopods, especially these squid and cuttlefish and octopuses, are a deeply alien intelligence. And the bigger they get, the more intelligent they are. And the biggest one of all is the colossal squid and the giant squid that are very, very, very deep. So deep that one has never been contacted alive. But they're solving all kinds of complex problems down there with their appendages and doing all kinds of things. We have no interest in going deep intellectually and trying to understand this deeply alien intelligence that already exists on this friggin' planet, which should be called planet ocean. 99% of the living space on this planet is not on land. It's in the ocean.
Planet ocean, correct.
Absolutely. So say 100 years after seasteading, we're living in the deep sea. Or if you're an alien intelligence that comes to this earth to study it, what you're going to see is a vast amount of life and a vast amount of three-dimensional living in the ocean. And then some of the mountains are the seamounts are going to come up above the water, and that's less than a third of the planet. And there's this very strange ape that lives on the very tippy top of all this living space and thinks everything that exists is on his little land that he's fighting over. But all the real life and interesting stuff is happening beneath him in this deep medium that he hasn't really entered or explored yet. Not truly.
But isn't it true, though, that when you're talking about the sea, most of the life of the sea is on coral reefs, isn't it? When you go out, I've been diving out in the South China Sea. There's nothing there. We made a film once about hooker pipe divers who used to go down 40 or 50 meters. And we had to sort of jump into very blue water and look down and you could see a long way. South China Sea is really clear. And there's nothing there. And there's nothing for hundreds and hundreds of miles. There's nothing swimming around.
Yeah.
Are you saying that there's, I mean, how are you saying that there's all this life?
So most of the surface ocean is a desert. There's no life at all because all the organic matter sinks below where sunlight can reach to induce photosynthesis. So when you watch a Sir David Attenborough thing about life under the sea, you're like, oh my God, the ocean is so rich. But yeah, it's mostly coral reefs, basically where upwellings happen. All the rich nutrient wealth is below the surface of the ocean. And so the oceans will move and they'll hit a seamount and it'll push all this stuff up. And in these tiny areas of the ocean, there's just gardens of life and coral reefs and all this stuff. So in my book, a lot of the seasteaders I make these kind of arguments when I was meeting them 12 years ago. That, seasteads will create more life on the ocean. Everything solid you float out there, anything you suck up from the bottom, will just naturally create life. All the spores floating around are starving for something to attach to. They can't do it to boats. They do it to boats, but boats keep scraping it off because it's bad for movement. But if you're holding still, you can grow as much life as you want, and a lot of that life is edible. But if you go deep to the ocean floor, there's a lot of those places you're going to find life. And a lot of it is very mysterious.
Yes, I don't know. It's like I say, all the arguments are compelling, but I just know it's not for me. But you think it would, even if I was alive in 50 years' time, it would be for me. It would be something I would just take for granted.
It'll just be a mainstream.
And it's because floating cities will just appear. It's not like you're going to walk onto a platform and go, whoa, I'm on a...
Yeah, the first pioneers will be dealing with that. But once it's the size of this building or the size of this city block or the size of this city, eventually people aren't even going to be thinking about it. They're just going to be going to another place, and they're not going to think about whether it's floating and anchored to a seamount or not, because the problems are solved, and you're not dealing with, especially if you're close to the equator. I don't know if you saw my map in my talk, the gigantic areas of the ocean.
Yes, I did.
Basically everything between Brazil and Africa has never had a hurricane, at least in recorded history. There's a seamount, 50 meters in international water, 50 meters below the ocean, that goes on for like, I don't know what it is, 50 miles or something. A lot of people have independently just said that's the ideal place to seastead. You can tether to these things and build all kinds of cities.
Do you think, take that as an example, because that's a good example. Say you create this absolutely massive, private city, and it's moored or it's anchored or somewhere like that. Almost certainly, the United Nations or one of those, or one world quite institutions is going to say, right, we are going to impose some regulations on you, because they do it. They've already done it for space, even though no one's been, there's already agreements in place, aren't there? Unilateral agreements that you can't own anything in space. I know in reality that's going to be very difficult to police. If you're Elon and you've beaten the government by probably 50 years, what are they going to do? Say, when you come back, you're in big trouble or something?
Yeah.
But almost certainly at sea, especially once you start feeling like a country or an entity, presumably they're going to start making up rules and regs. And what's to stop the United Nations just changing that rule about deeper water? They'll say that they're moving with the times, that these are new things because in the past we didn't have to deal with this. Now we do, obviously, because we're in charge. We're going to have to say that is something, now you need to pay us this, or you can't do that, or whatever.
Always go back to the cruise ship analogy. Reminder, all these cruise ships, and there's a lot more than cruise ships on the sea. There's all sorts of vessels. In my talk, I showed a map. There's 180,000 on the ocean right now. All different I'm just counting vessels, small ones, big ones, put them all together. They're all self-governing while they're on the sea. The United Nations doesn't go to the biggest cruise ship and say, well, now we got to impose some rules on you. But so let's say, here's something we were in French Polynesia because a lot of these low-lying islands are afraid of going underneath the water. And they want to kind of transition to being seasteads, but then they don't actually want to make it happen. They just want to be known for saying they want to make it happen. I think the one that's probably most in danger is Kiribati. So say Kiribati transforms their little atolls and makes little seasteads next door, little floating platforms in their shallow oceans. But meanwhile, their land kind of sinks beneath the ocean. Is the United Nations going to say, like, well, you don't get your EEZ anymore, you don't get your sovereign rights, the people of Kiribati? They'll probably say, no, we'll recognize your floating platforms as nations, and you keep all the same rules. You're still the sovereign nation of Kiribati. I think that could easily happen. Kiribati becomes a seastead nation. All right, now another maverick, like say me, sets up one next door outside their jurisdiction. Well, now we have a precedent. Seasteads are already recognized by the United Nations. Now we have a new one. Well, it's just sort of ignored, but now babies are born there. The United Nations has an entire department dedicated to the statelessness of children. Can you make a petition to the United Nations? Hey, we're beneficent. There's 100 of us, all of these all over the world. There's 1,000 of them, say. We want them to be recognized as sovereign entities. Look at all these children. You want them all to be stateless? I think, and I know, our maritime attorney, who has been volunteering at the Seasteading Institute since before I got involved, and wrote the best first paper about how seasteads could work on the sea, has said to me that he would love to get on the floor of the United Nations to make precisely that argument. So these things will be slowly scaled up, right? So the way seasteading is going to work is you're winning, again, the cruise ship model. You're winning the hearts and minds of people. People are choosing it because they like it. The politicians' nephews have been there. Their daughters have been there. They themselves want to park some of their wealth there because it's a better choice than the Cayman Islands. You're just sort of winning people over, and people don't consider it that radical. It's just another choice. And then babies are born out there, and pretty soon they're recognized as unique entities. Pretty soon they don't need a maritime flag. They get their own flag. Maybe they petition the United Nations for, we want sovereignty, we want our own flag. Or maybe we don't want a flag at all. I think the place we're at 100 years from now is these things aren't defined as states. They're new kinds of entities. They're not nations. They're not countries. They're sovereign governance providers. And we just sort of evolve towards that. And I think they will obviously be better than the shitty states because monopolies are always worse for the consumer.
Well, that in that timeline, will that go hand in hand with the devolution of the state as well?
I think the devolution of the state is inevitable. So
when?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on the currencies. So that's part of my motivation for this, because we have to scale up as fast as we have to evolve as fast as the states are devolving. So we have to quickly win people over to not provoke violence, because ultimately the good thing about democracies is mostly it'll be a lot of the people will have to be mad about it. The president in the U.S. wanted to get involved in World War II, but he knew he couldn't until the people were motivated to get involved, and that didn't happen until Pearl Harbor. So don't provoke the immune system of the state. Be like the Cayman Islands, not Nicaragua. Nicaragua under the bad guy.
I like that. Don't provoke the immune system of the state. That's a good rule in general, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'll give you another. So you're from England.
Yes.
So right off your coast is Sealand.
I know it.
Why don't they just send ships out there to blow it up and kill those people?
Because it's not a threat.
It's not a threat. It's not worth the PR nightmare.
Yeah.
And those guys are completely radical and have done crazy stuff and have locked each other in prison and have raiding each other.
I mean, they have had some. Didn't the government go out there once? Something happened, didn't they?
I think it was the 14-year-old son of the founder fired a warning shot across the bow of a Royal British Navy ship. Guess what they did? They backed off.
Really?
Yeah.
Did they? Yeah.
Because, under some international law, it depends on if you interpret it as a vessel, which it's not, you can sort of do that. That's the warning. But it's like, okay, do you really want to fire back at this kid? That guy is now, he's got his third generation dynasty and his kid running Sealand. They've made a living out there with their own, something they declare a micronation. It's not recognized by the world, but you can always say, well, what's to stop them from just going out there and killing you? Something like the Thai Navy does, but the British Navy doesn't. There's a lot of ocean out there. There's a lot of countries to build seasteads off the coast of.
What's another example, though, of something that we take for granted now that started off under such sort of radical circumstances? You know what I mean? Like
capitalism.
Go on.
Capitalism started with Venice. Venice is the first pre-stead, or if you want to call it a swampstead. So feudalism dominated Europe. How did the Renaissance start? How did all this free market stuff start? What kicked all this off? Well, there was so much war in Italy. First of all, Italy's sort of unique because it's on the other side of the Alps. So it's hard to get armies across it. But there was tons of war in Italy. Refugees couldn't stand it anymore. They're just trying to not die, so they're moving to a swamp. So over time, it's like, well, we need a church. Let's build a church on stilts. That was like in the 600s. So they had a little church out there. They're living in their little boats. They're skimming salt off the surface of the ocean certain times a year to sell that salt to the world because salt was such a precious commodity. This thing we just use casually that costs nothing now. People were willing to die along the Silk Road to get. Well, they found something they could trade, sell to the world so they can get stuff back, which answers another seasteading question. Well, how are you going to make a living out there? How are you going to get food? How are you going to be independent? You rely on the resources of land. Yeah, Venice relied on the resources of land. They had to find a unique service to trade for all the resources of the land. All islands everywhere prosper by trade with the rest of the world, just like cruise ships do. So through trade, it starts slowly getting richer. More and more stilts are built. You got to watch these videos on YouTube of how complicated and innovative and clever it was that they started building up this city on a swamp that was slowly sinking all the time. And how do you get water? And how do you defend yourself? And how do you get food? And how do you raise your children? How do you walk around? Who will build the roads? Well, they just use the water as roads. So eventually, it built up to this city-state that was independent of all the kings on land. And it wasn't run by kings. It was run by merchants. It was run by bankers. So all the innovations we just take for granted in our free market world started on the swampstead, whether it's double entry bookkeeping that keeps track of all these debits and credits that were happening all over the world. Don't tell a Venetian that we're not a seagoing species because they were traveling all over the world, incorporating all the best practices of different businesses around the world. They were in a perfect hub that a lot of trade had to go through them. They lent, they built up banks. The foundational institutions of capitalism were started in Venice. They attracted the most creative people in the world. Isn't it remarkable to think that Michelangelo's and Da Vinci's and Vivaldi's, they always existed among us, but we just never discovered them. They never had a chance to flourish until they went to Venice and found rich people that wanted to show how much status they had. They were the sheiks of their time, willing to pay these artists to make beautiful things that made other city-states they were at war with want to compete with them. So everyone starts competing for the creativity and innovation of the world. Before you know it, something is happening, some kind of flourishing of creativity that in retrospect would be called the Renaissance, totally takes over Europe. The Dutch develop, catch on. They're the ones that went to the United States and founded Wall Street and New York and created all these businesses that ended up being the real foundation of the United States, in my opinion. It's the free market, non-warlike, capitalist, voluntarist, decentralized networks of the world that were founded near seas among ocean-going societies outside the jurisdictions of states, that without seasteading that kicked off the Renaissance, we wouldn't have the world we live in today, which is the standard for the whole world. China has imitated it. The whole world has imitated the innovations of Venice. So there's a seastead for you. Should I go back further in time? So the talk I gave last year, I go through it very fast. Where did Western civilization start? Did it start in ancient Greece? What was ancient Greece? It was hundreds of little islands, each self-governing, competing for the best and the brightest, where people could leave anytime they want. They were at war, they were killing each other, they were doing all that stuff. Where do you get this idea? Democracy, theocracy, oligopoly, tyranny, all these words came from Aristotle, who was studying all these different islands and saying, it's very interesting. All these things seem to go through different evolutions and they all have different ways of governing themselves. And he invented the science of politics that we talk about now because everybody was on these islands competing with that same shitty human nature we have right now, but bringing out the best in human ingenuity because nobody can get control of everybody else. All you need to do is decentralize governance, and you're going to kick off human creativity that's been held back since the dawn of time. I think we're on the verge of the next ocean renaissance, and it's going to completely outdo Venice.
Do you think that that devolution will happen on land, radically?
I do, because it's the same human nature that's on land. And as long as I can go work for the government and then I'm just guaranteed an income forever, as long as I don't take any risks, and I'm always incentivized to prevent bad things from happening. I don't get rewarded if something good happens. And I'm always incentivized, well, I need a bigger budget, so go confiscate more from the taxpayer. Humans are always going to be attracted to that. We want that kind of security. It's always easier. You can't get that started if people could just take their city block and move somewhere else and choose a different governance service provider, and governance is a service.
But I mean, as a historical moment, you're saying, and I kind of, when you put it like that, yeah, I could agree potentially. I still think the timeline is slower than you're really bullish on the timeline, aren't you? I want to know what happens on land in the meantime. Like, what's happening on land? Are states still getting bigger at this point?
Yeah, bigger isn't the problem. It's a quest for absolute power over other people. That's what we all want. And you want to prevent us from getting it.
You want that?
Not you and me, but I think...
I know, but how many people do? I never understood why that's such a thing. Like, it's very hard to imagine why you would want to completely tell someone else what to do. It does seem to not make human sense. Like, really, when you, deep down, I mean, you can kid yourself into thinking, I need to tell that person what to do. And, if someone's attacking you, you feel like telling them to stop attacking you and you'll use force. But other than that, the idea that people, when left to their own devices, will be as creative as they can, the most creative they can be, that's obvious. It doesn't, I don't understand how that's not more of a pervasive argument for life in general.
Because people don't respond to arguments. They just
a way of living. Then, like, it's obvious, right? It's obvious. The whole free market principle is obvious. There's so many examples of it. You know it with your kids, even when you have children. You know. If you're telling them you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that, you get terrible kids. Everyone knows that. You give them a boundary, you let them run riot in there. You know, as kids, because you're kind of, but, and when they become 16, 18 or whatever, that's it. They're free.
Yeah.
We all know that, right?
So 1 in 8 Asian men has the DNA of Genghis Khan. Okay, the evolution of the urge to control other people and take their stuff and impregnate their daughters.
It came from one guy.
No, it goes all the way back. If you compare the Y chromosome, which we all inherit to our fathers, with the X chromosome, which we all inherit from our mothers. Did I say that right? All the other genes are shuffled by sex. Sex is a gene shuffling gene. The ones that remain intact are the X chromosome in our mitochondria. Our mitochondrial DNA we get from our mothers. The Y chromosome we get from our fathers. The Y chromosome has shockingly narrow genetic diversity compared to the mitochondrial DNA. And what we can conclude from this is during most of, say, Homo sapiens evolution, if we don't even count Homo erectus, basically twice as many women got to be mothers as men got to be fathers. So you come into this world as a teenage boy with testosterone, not knowing that your instincts were selected for. So, if you survive childhood and childbirth as a female, there's a pretty good chance if you play your cards right, you're going to get your genes into the next generation. Because two-thirds of your forebears, your previous women, got their genes into the next generation. So I'm going high to make the point. Say it's 2/3 of women get their genes into the next generation. Well, only 1/3 of males get their genes into the next generation. So every boy comes into the world saying, I got to beat out 2/3 of other men. You're not in a world, you can trade inside your tribe, but with your enemies, there's limited resources. You're competing over the same hunting grounds. Read history, read Keeley, War Before Civilization. There's just been relentless culling of men. They kill each other, they kill each other, they kill each other. And a small number of men spread their genes among many women. And a larger number of women survive childhood and childbirth, two very difficult things to survive, and pass their genes on. It's not just men's fault because socially dominant men, women find them sexy. Men dressed in uniform, they are so hot when they're marching off to war to kill other men. They can really protect me. We are a tribal, warlike species who want to control each other. I don't know why I got the genetic dice roll that's a minority that you apparently got too, which is I just want to be left alone to do my own thing. I want power over myself. When I get chosen as a leader, I just experience it as a tremendous responsibility. Most people seem to really get off on it. Even among chimps, I mean, it's stressful to be the leader, but there's also an instinct to follow. People want leaders. They want to be told what to do. They want to follow directions. They want to be given a path. They want to feel secure. So that once we developed complex enough society, so our instincts came from the Pleistocene savanna. Our instincts come from the tribe. All of that stuff is socialist. It's not until a phase change happened where we had enough products that money emerged and prices emerged from that now there's a global intelligence happening that's counterintuitive. That all this wealth, we imagine God's showering us with wealth. The market is showering us with wealth. I mean, look at this microphone. Nobody knows how to make it, but it emerges from all this decentralized competition to serve each other. So we have these two instincts to control other people and we'll talk about strangers, to control strangers to get their stuff, and to trade with strangers to get their stuff. which is the best strategy to allow my family to prosper, to allow my children to prosper. If you're stuck on monopoly land, inevitably, no matter what, that evolves toward a monopoly of governance controlled by a military, which bureaucrats inherit, which people interested in power, and that's their only skill, climb to the top of that. Then they control other people, and the world worships them as heroes, no matter how bad they are. That's why this morning we were talking about a statue of Stalin, which was the biggest statue of the world not long ago. 51% of Russians a few years ago said they had a positive view of Stalin. You still believe in democracy? Isn't Stalin evil? Well, outsiders think he's evil. A lot of people in Russia think he was a great man. They want to follow a strong leader. So, Seasteads are a technology to discourage that side of human nature, to make it harder to do, so you're less like Stalin and more like a cruise ship captain, where you have to compete to serve strangers in order to make your families flourish, because everybody can choose to go somewhere else. The ultimate decentralization of power is to decentralize the very ground beneath our feet. I think when we do that, our instinct to cooperate and our natural proclivity to unleash the global brain that is the marketplace will be unleashed from these shitty states. And it will scale up so fast with so much creativity, equivalent to the Renaissance, that will just outcompete the states, and they'll slowly go bankrupt as their children's hearts and minds are won over by the seastead world. And they won't even be called seasteads. They'll just be called places to go.
And it is an evolution. The evolution goes like this, right? You steal stuff from other people, you trade stuff with other people. Like the kind of the evolved version of stealing from people is trading with people, right?
Yes, trade emerged. I mean, trade goes all the way back. Homo erectus traded. We have lots of evidence for that. So when chimps meet another tribe, the males try to kill each other if they can outnumber each other. Humans have this interesting thing. They have opposable thumbs. They make stuff. So you meet another tribe, you kind of want to fight with them, but it's like they know how to make something good, and I know how to make something different. Maybe we could trade. So that slowly scaled up. It slowly emerged. And in totally contradicting our instincts, our instinct to trade is really real with strangers. But that keeps scaling up. But the bureaucratization, the manifestation of our instinct to war with each other ended up as nation states and smaller states inside them.
Do we ever let go of that side of it? Like I can see it as a technological advancement, the trade, as opposed to stealing.
Yeah.
Do we ever leave stealing behind?
No.
Why not?
Because if you can get stuff more easily by stealing, most people choose to do it.
But can't an evolutionary process make stealing too difficult?
Well, an evolutionary market process can make stealing too difficult. That's why it's so peaceful in certain civilized places I go, where most people just don't steal, because you know what? It's just easier to cooperate. And then you have a culture of trust.
Abundance, in places of abundance, I suppose.
Yeah. I'm from Oakland, California. People take advantage of restaurants all the time. I'm in a Prague restaurant. Every place I've eaten, they come over to charge you, and they ask you what you've had, so they know what to plug in and charge you. And I'm like, oh, I just had a glass of water. I mean, what's to stop me from lying? Well, there's enough cooperation going on that there's a culture of trust, and you scratch my back and I scratch yours, and we're part of the same city, so I consider you part of the same tribe and all that sort of stuff. So yes, I think you can create the conditions by which people would prefer to be civil with each other and to trust each other and be polite with each other. I mean, the best thing about human nature is everywhere I've gone, if I'm lost and I ask for directions, I'm old enough where I remember asking for directions. Never once has someone said, "Begone, foreign dog! Get away from me, you stranger." No, people naturally, they're making eye contact with you. They want to help you out for no other incentive than to get that giver's high and to pay things forward. So we do have that in us. But if I'm having trouble paying for my kids' education and I can get a job where I'm several steps removed from the people who are being exploited or taxed or whatever to pay for my job, I'm going to do that, right? Just like you work for the Independent. It's like, well, some of the things my bosses do are a little shady, but I'm just the camera guy. It's not that bad. But over time, it starts to nag at you a little bit. And then you're saying, I just don't want to do this anymore because I'm evolving and I'm learning about free private cities. And I kind of want to live in a world where, and then you're exposed to alternative. Look at all these alternative media on X. Now I'm seeing other ways media could work. I can see that you can have cooperative, honest media. I guess I want to do that, actually. So there's no question cultures of trust and good behavior and civil society develop and evolve. But people fundamentally are self-serving, or I prefer to say family-serving.
Or maybe there is also, because of the diversity of ability, there might always be people who find it hard to compete and therefore break the rules.
Yeah, or get resentful. Like, no matter what I try, nothing works. That guy's already rich. Maybe I can take a little something from him.
Well, like you've been to a government office recently. You don't find too many inspirational people there.
No.
Surprisingly.
Yeah, I've had experiences, in the United States where I walk into the room and the person's hostile to me straight out of the gate, at the DMV. And I'm like, I'm being completely polite and they already hate me because they can tell I don't have a miserable job like they do.
Oh, God. I don't know. I'm...
Next, skepticism.
It's not my skepticisms. I'm just like, I want to hash this out because I know this is a brilliant idea and model and everything. It's so cool and it's so brilliant. But I think I have a barrier to visualizing it as a reality. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's too science fiction in a way. You could show me a picture of, or like your average sci-fi movie where you've got these floating cities, and stuff like that. I'm sure all that stuff will eventually exist. Yeah, I don't know how, but I don't make the connection between that or say Seasteads that quickly. I'm thinking about it and I'm thinking, like if I think about mobilizing people, even in a decentralized way, that people ground up immobilization of people, this is a huge undertaking because there's no infrastructure already in existence. It's all being built. Like there's, and I know, and I'd love to be a fly on the wall in 100 years' time. I'd look back at this conversation because I'm being such a obviously. Like, it's so obvious what I'm saying is I'm just, you know what I mean? Like, if I look, you could use the example of look back 100 years and imagine you and me discussing the telephone or something. And you're going, no, seriously, we're going to be talking through air on the other side of the world on a little box. And I'm going to be going, yeah, but... how?
And someone has to explain it, which, I mean, infrastructure. That's for land, man. Yeah. So Grant's Deepwater SeaPod, already everything is done with solar. All the energy you need is done with solar.
That's right. Yeah.
The toilet is an incinerator toilet that converts your waste into a couple grams of ash. It recycles the same water over and over. Elon Musk has provided us with Starlink. You can do internet from anywhere. Try to think of something you do on land that you can't do on the SeaPod that's floating right now in pretty high waves, stably, with a helicopter that can land on it and a jet ski that can lift it up into its side. So you don't need infrastructure much.
I just thought what it is, I've got these barriers in my mind, and I'm thinking about, you probably don't know this, but there used to be this program on TV in the UK in the 70s called Tomorrow's World. Mm-hmm. And it was basically a BBC program where they sort of, predicted the future. And most of the time they got it kind of wrong. I feel that when I look at a seastead, I'm thinking, this is an incorrect prediction because it doesn't look like it's gonna, even though it's a real thing that's sitting there in the sea,
Yeah.
it's like an idea that only a certain number of people will click into.
Initially, 1% of 1% of 1% will be Grant's customers. But all you need is 1 or 2 or 3 in different parts of the world that are just modest little things as big as this building, more than 12 miles out to sea. And then people think it's cool. Look, it was probably hard to sell people on yachts. Yachts are much bigger, more complicated, require more what we shall call infrastructure, way more expensive with engines and inefficient and all that crap. And there are thousands of them all over the world that people own. Suppose the yacht never had to come to shore and it was 1/10 as expensive. I mean, you just need to start selling a few. We've got the minimal viable product. You can have different kinds. And if we perfect the technology for staying out at sea, which is we're basically there, if the coralcrete works, if Mitchell's materials works, there's all sorts of things you can use that don't corrode in seawater. Most of it's expensive.
Yeah, he said you run an electric current through it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was even possible. It stops rust, right?
Yeah.
Very small electric current running through the metal.
It stops rust and it attracts calcium carbonate from the ocean naturally. So you encase your seastead in a seashell. And if mollusks find that protective, I think the seastead will be safe inside that. So fundamentally, it's just never going to corrode, except for that area where the interface between the water and the air, as that goes up and down, that part could rust. So that might have to be painted now again, just like you do for a ship. But yeah, and then that's all natural, and then now you have a life growing on a coral garden. So do you think a dozen could happen on different parts of the world of seasteads?
Are we talking the individual ones here?
Yeah, individual ones.
Oh, I'm almost certain they will. More than a dozen. I think the tourist aspect of it makes total sense to me. Like especially I've been in the Emirates a lot, been going to and from, and it's the kind of thing that happens there all the time. Drones, they were the first with drone taxis. They were the first, this is another one of those things where it's like, but if you think about it, mind you, drone technology is moving very, very fast. I get that. I don't disbelieve any of this at all, Joe. I think it's all definitely going to happen. I just kind of like, I suppose me personally, I want it to get to the bit where we have floating cities quick.
Yeah.
I don't, because the other one doesn't interest me. The individual pod bit doesn't interest me.
Yeah. The only thing I love more than seasteading is my wife. My wife says she's not moving to a seastead until she can walk her dogs. So Ocean Builders is already planning floating wave breakers. And they have some nice digital designs that include, a permanent floating wave breaker where you can park your sailboat inside and move in, and it's protecting you from the waves. Well, you can have grass on that. You can grow trees on that. You can walk around on that. It's sort of like a little land park at sea. You can sort of scale that up. You can make those bigger and bigger and bigger. I knew guys that wanted to make wave breakers that capture wave industry, wave energy. And their plan was once the wave energy we capture can pay for the wave breaker itself, this can be scaled up to any level. It'll just pay for itself. And this will be the ultimate wave breaker for seasteads. Now, I haven't heard from those co-founders in a couple of years, so I assume they haven't quite been able to make it work. That's the way it works in seasteading, actually. There are aquapreneurs working hard on something. They love telling me about it. I used to have them on the podcast, and then I stopped hearing from them. So I just assume, well, I guess it's not quite working out. But the fact that so many people get inspired to try stuff is pretty amazing.
What was the history of the seasteading movement, and are you noticing an ebb and a flow of interest in it? Because I think with something this unbelievable and dramatic and exceptionally sort of radical and new, often you find that in the beginning everyone's like super excited and then it just dies off.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you find that? I mean, even with new, like Grant's, what does he call that thing? Is it?
They call it a spar. I call it a sea pillar.
Okay.
No, he calls it
the whole thing. It's a
SeaPod.
Yeah. His SeaPod, that's only recently been.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I take it, I mean, I didn't see it, but I'm almost certain that got a lot of press.
No.
Really?
It did not get a lot of press. So we're in a privileged position at the Free Cities conference.
So the one he's got moored off the, don't they want to, I mean, every bloody newspaper must.
Well, they did a bit. So there's three different kinds of SeaPods. There's two shallow water ones that are close to land. That got a lot of press.
Yes.
No one mentioned the word seasteading in it. Because seasteads are politically autonomous things that float at sea. So now they've got the third version that is further out to sea, that has an underwater room, is working in waves, which means it could work more than 12 miles out. It's a potential seastead. Virtually nobody has seen that. Nobody has noticed it. So yes, you're correct. Before I ever got involved with seasteading, somebody founded the Seasteading Institute. Matter of fact, it was Peter Thiel and Patrick Friedman.
Peter Thiel, was it?
Yeah.
I knew it was Patrick Friedman.
Immediately the press said billionaires trying to create tax havens for evil villains. Then Joe Quirk swooped into the scene and said the only way to defeat a bad narrative is to tell a better story. Tell a story that's more compelling than their shitty story. So I started telling the positive story, which includes all these eco-restorative effects, which Ocean Builders has been emphasizing and implementing and proving that it works. So they got a lot of press for that. They're like eco SeaPods. But we want a seastead. We want startup governance, competitive governance on the blue frontier. So this turns off 99% of people, but it excites 1% of 1% of people, and they get involved. We've had a lot of exciting things happening, including an agreement with French Polynesia to potentially build seasteads in their territorial waters, in their atolls, which serve as natural wave breakers. So exciting things happen, and then you get kicked in the face, and most people go away. And then more exciting things happen, and then you attract new people to the new exciting thing, and then you get kicked in the face. The kick in the face is always the government. And then more people drift away. But I'm not stopping. Grant isn't stopping. Chad isn't stopping. I don't know if you saw the end of my talk where I showed you the guys who died who weren't stopping.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So that guy vowed, he says, I'm dying at sea. I'm never going back to land again. I'm going all the way. And he independently discovered that seamount, that seaplane off the near the Seychelles Islands in Africa. A lot of people discover that. I mentioned the one off the coast of Brazil. There's another one off the coast of Africa near the Seychelles Islands. He discovered that, so he planned on getting bigger barges and towing them all the way there and anchoring on those things and building a floating country. That's what he was going to do. He did it in a completely unsafe way, so I refused to sanction what he was doing.
But he did it nevertheless.
He did it nevertheless and got killed because he didn't listen to me. I mean, this is the first time I'm saying that publicly. So there's two things the Seasteading Institute needs to do. We need to make this legal. We do that through a certification society, insurance, and flagging. We also need to protect seasteading from mavericks. We do that through a certification society, insurance, and flagging. You got to go through the Seasteading Institute certification process where we promise your seastead is safe and you can bring your kids to it. So the age of cowboys has to be done. I want these to be the last 3 martyrs for seasteading. Chad and Nadia and Grant nearly got killed. these guys, Samuel Landy, those guys really did get killed. Let's become adults, do this professionally because we're ready. They're making the safe versions, and so we have to do this right. Same way boats do, same way ships do. Get it certified and develop a new classification of vessel called a seastead.
And we spoke about this last time I spoke to you. It was a year ago, wasn't it? This time last year. What are you any further or any closer to those classifications?
Well, to do it, we need money.
But what about someone like Grant, for example? He doesn't seem shy to. I mean, a lot. How much money? We're talking a lot of money.
I'm probably going to need millions to bring this to fruition, and we're working on low six figures every year because I need to convince people that this is the way to make seasteads happen. And I'll tell you what, these aquapreneurs don't understand it because they haven't gotten there yet. They don't understand there is a gigantic bureaucratic wall between them and 12 miles, 12.1 miles. If they want to be houseboats in territorial waters, they can do that forever. If they want a seastead, they need to make these things certified, insured, and flagged. And then we will have tremendous freedom. It's going to cost money. It's just not within the incentives of any particular seastead company to spend I estimate $2 million back of the napkin to do this right. So they can then establish a certification process for seasteads that they spent $2 million on, and then all their competitors rush in and pay a couple $1,000 and get their flag. This has to be done by the nonprofit. And virtually nobody on land understands this because now we're talking about international law and we're talking about real freedom. And no matter how many times I explain it, the land folk who believe in freedom will come back and say like, well, why don't you ask the Panama government? No, don't talk to the government. Talk to the flagging registry of Panama. Because the cruise ship that is free on the sea doesn't talk to the government. They talk to the flagging registry. And now they're a free private floating city. Countries franchise out their sovereignty granting privileges to private companies. The Bahamas government doesn't do it. The Liberian government, former failed state, sure as hell doesn't do it. But they have incredibly successful flagging registries. When I talk to the Liberian government, I'm talking to guys in New York City. They're running the flagging registry on behalf of the Liberian government. And these are some of the Liberia, Bahamas, these are some of the highest rated flags in the world. But you got to do it right. They don't want to flag anything that isn't safe and insured. So the Seasteading Institute understands this. Maybe I'm the only one that understands this. A lot of our volunteers who work in the ocean industry absolutely understand it. And they're all helping. We have naval architects, we have maritime lawyers, we have certification surveyors, people secretly inspired by seasteading who don't want their colleagues to know they're helping us. Maritime lawyers, don't tell my colleagues I'm working with you guys, but this is an amazing idea and it can actually happen. And the only thing standing in the way is the nonprofit doesn't have the budget to make it happen. So I'm tearing my hair out because flagging registries have spoken to us, and once they clue in that we don't have the budget yet, they walk away. But they want to make money flagging seasteads.
There lies the predicament.
There lies the predicament. So every libertarian donor out there needs to listen to this podcast. Stop funding people who are arguing with statists. If you convince all 8 billion people that libertarian philosophy is correct, the state won't go away. Because it's always better to exploit people through the state, even if I understand what you're saying. Persuasion will never work. There is nobody to vote for that's going to bring you freedom. You have to create it on a new frontier, on a completely blank slate, and we got to do it through the flagging registries. We're this close. We're this close. So in the time I've been involved, say 13 years, it's gone from an idea that everybody hates to governments have made agreements with us and then screwed us over. We solved the price problem. We solved the wave problem, the engineering problem. The business ideas are there. We've inspired the companies to try to make it happen. The only thing standing in our way is our legal right to seastead, which we get through flagging registries. We need to close that deal, and there's no incentive for anybody to do it. It needs to be a service provided by the nonprofit to all seasteaders everywhere for all time. So once we do this, it's for all time.
What about someone like Peter Thiel, though? Is he still? Does he have any interest in seasteading anymore? Is that?
I've never met the man, and no seasteader I know. Chad has never met the man. Nadia has never met the man. Grant's never met the man. Peter, listen to this podcast. Give me a call. Musk.
Sure, he's got £2 million.
Yeah,
$2 million.
I think it's like it seems cool. It gets weird in the press, and then your interests are elsewhere. You know, if you're a brilliant person, your interests are all over the place. I don't know anything about Peter Thiel, but temperamentally, he seems like a startup type of guy. Like he likes to get radical things started, and then he's not interested. You know, either make it happen or maybe it's not going to happen. I want to empower people to make things happen. I'll give the college kid $100,000 to try to make something happen. You know what I mean? That's a guy that's really thinking on the cutting edge. But
it really has to be people or somebody or a number of people who just believe in the idea, because there's no way of recouping that money, right? Unless you have a business interest that is a seastead or a seasteading company or something like that.
All I can offer you is your name on the plaque at the base of the flagpole of the first legally flagged seastead, which will be as significant as the Statue of Liberty. Once all seas are freed everywhere, it won't be appreciated at the time, except by seasteaders, but in the future, people will look back and realize, oh my God, there's those founders who signed the Declaration of Independence at the base of that first flag for international waters. Wow.
Presumably, though, the market will pay for it eventually. I mean, you know, if, for example, take Grant. If Grant needed a flag to position his house off the coast of an island, he would, wouldn't he? He would.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But he would need to understand the process. And I'd be willing to help them with that. You know, what little we've been able to discover.
But that's what I mean. Probably that's why I'm thinking that these ideas are very ahead of their time in a way. Grant's, in a way, not. You can, you know, he's rent. I mean, you can rent that as an Airbnb for $1,000 a night if you want. It's actually there and it's real and it's a real marketable good. And it's like, yes.
Yeah.
The seastead is still in the ideas stage, isn't it? The actual, I mean, the realistic seastead, because I suppose the individual seastead at 12 and a half miles out is a very small market, right?
Yep.
Really small. I mean, much smaller than Grant's market. You know? Yeah.
But let's.
And I know it leads to, in the future, a million other things, but that's the barrier to entry to that level. Very small market, very high barrier to entry, right? Whereas at least, because, you know, there's hardly anyone that wants to live there currently, and they need a flag in order to do it, which costs, what do you have, £2 million to get it sorted? Yeah.
So I should point out that when Chad and Nadia built that little tin can on the sea, I forget how many people, was it 50, 100, who reached out after I made my little documentary about it on YouTube, who reached out and said, yeah, I want to buy one, and was prepared to go live in a community out there with them. And then during the manhunt, that number tripled. The manhunt only attracted more people going to Ocean Builders saying, I want to buy one if you guys survive. So that happened. There was a market already happening, assuming those people would pull the trigger. There's no reason to assume that. I forgot what you had said before that.
No, I was just mentioning that if you look at Grant's market it's very, I can conceive of that market, and I can even see, put it this way, I'm not a very good salesman, but I could sell one of Grant's pods If you said go and sell that, I reckon I could sell it.
Oh, really? Can you sell it? Can you help us?
I'll give it a go if you want. But I mean, out in the Middle East, I mean, there are people right now who will look at that and go, brilliant. In the same vein that there are people out there that want to build a tower 2 meters taller than their neighbor's tower, simply because at that level, there are very few ways, at that level of wealth, there are very few ways to delineate yourself from the other billionaire just over there. And things like the first ever floating houses that are good. I mean, they're high level. Grant's creation is a 5-star experience from what I saw in their video, which wasn't a render. It was the actual one he's living in. Yeah. Which is important with, guys out in the Emirates, Yeah. You can't just sell them a crappy Seastead. You've got to sell them the Rolls Royce of Seasteads,
Yeah. And he's built the Rolls Royce.
He has, yes.
Yeah. But we have a division of labor here. He's the technology guy. So he had enough background knowledge that he realized right away something that I thought was impossible, which is like every single one of these things I can put on a floating home. I can make my futuristic smart house and it will work. Well, I'd like to see that. Holy shit, he's done it. But that's the exciting part. We have the technologist and the entrepreneur who put all this together and brought the price down and is selling it at reasonable costs, in my opinion. But what we understand at the Seasteading Institute is the boring part, which is the legal ecosystem on the seas. And that requires a lot of explaining. And we've done a lot of research on it. And I saw this coming years ago. And now the actual marine engineers and aquapreneurs are way ahead in the race. They're building the technology to make it happen. But we got to deal with, if they just go out on the high seas and just station these things unflagged, well, first of all, you haven't guaranteed to me that it's safe. I want to get that through a certification society and an insurer. I want to see it be insured by a marine insurer. We might not be able to get that because it's such a novel technology. We might not be able to get insured. But if it's not flagged, you could be treated as a pirate. If it is flagged, you're in the network of international law, and you're completely legit, and everyone else has to recognize you, even if you're flagged by Palau, which I think could be a great option.
Well, good luck is all I can say to that. And
luck favors the bold.
It does. I mean, I've got a lot of respect for your passion, Joe, and for your absolute grit to keep going. And I know that in this business, and I'm talking about the Free Cities ecosystem in general here, and I would imagine that in all frontier businesses, it's the same thing. You get this, you get knocked back. You get this, you get knocked back. You get this. You're always just about to whatever. And things are moving. You can see that. This time last year, I was looking at prototypes that looked a little bit like tin cans.
Yeah.
This year, I looked at a space age pod straight out of, the future.
Yeah. That's how I opened my talk. I said 2 years ago, I was showing you this digital image of the Jetsons at sea. Now here's the real Jetsons at sea for sale, floating. So now extrapolate another 2 years. How much progress are we making? How many more of these things can we make? How much fancier can we make it? How much bigger can we make it? We're full on moving very fast.
But something I've noticed, though, that most of the kind of market-driven innovation is happening close to shore, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? And that's what I mean about your flagging. I think the flagging is super important, and it's almost a catch-22 situation. But until the market is out deeper at sea, which it kind of isn't at the moment, is it?
Well, the steps have been taken. So there's 2 pretty close to shore. And then the third is, a mile and a half out? I have a really impressive video. As you're coming over the mountains of Panama, and you're going, you see this little white thing on the horizon. You're like, is that going to be a Seastead? And you get closer and closer and closer. And then you swoop in on this thing that you're like, my God, this is really far out. And those waves are really strong and it's completely stable. If you're a seasteader, you see that, you're like, that will work 12 miles out. In waves like that stable, the third one is already pretty far out. It's not that far.
Yeah, but
it's pretty far.
I suppose you're always going to be able to answer me, but I'm thinking, who wants to live there? I can get living just off the coast of a beautiful tropical island like Grant does. He can get in a jet ski. He can jet ski for 5 minutes and he's on the beach if he wants. He can see the beach from his front room. But what I don't click with is what starts people living in these little things right out there where you are a lot more isolated, aren't you?
So 12 miles out, ferry ride, half hour. That's shorter than my commute from Silicon Valley to San Francisco.
But the reason to live there, is it just because you're outside of the jurisdiction? Is that the thing?
I think that's the business reason to live out there. I think the adventure, I think that it's beautiful. He's already got social media influencers that come stay on that thing frequently and love taking videos of themselves.
Which one? The one that's further out?
No, not that one. That one isn't open to the public yet. They're trying to beat the world's record for being underwater. Yeah. So that one's going to be
120 days.
I bet you at the end of 120 days when they announce they have the world's record, then the world starts paying attention to this thing. I bet you then people are going to do the CB&B on that thing.
Well, Grant told me his business partner he said he'd probably come up to the top to celebrate 120 days, but he reckons he'll go back down there. He said he likes it down there. Like, who are these people?
Exactly. That's the way pioneers are. So the people who were pioneers on the American frontier, who are these people?
I know, but dude, the Great Plains of America, I can get a 6-meter diameter room with a bike to pedal and a couple of sofas and a computer. That's pretty hardcore. Yeah. That's like prison, isn't it?
Are you sure if you're looking out the window and you're seeing the ocean in every direction?
Yes, I'm sure. Absolutely. If you've been on a boat for a long time, you know about like the insanity of looking at the same thing constantly.
You don't think looking out aquarium windows in every direction?
Oh no, you can get bored of everything, mate, can't you?
There are people that sit in their basements looking at computer screens all day.
Yeah, exactly. I think those kind of places may be suitable for those people. I'm not that guy for sure. Put me on the Great Plains of America with arrows flying over my head. That I enjoy. That's a real adventure for me.
Now you're the one who's weird, finally, in this podcast.
Well, no, I mean, I've always pushed frontiers. I've been a traveler my whole life. I've always gone to the most remote location I can go. I know it's not the same as if you were an adventurer 200 years ago. But I do a version of it, and I appreciate that. But I'm a wide open spaces kind of person.
There are people that live on boats. There are families that homeschool their kids on catamarans. There are people that never leave their their sailboat. There are ocean-going people. If I try to talk about seasteading, will be like, there are already people doing this. And I'm like, no, I mean like staying out there permanently. So a lot of people. So there's already people doing stuff like this, flying under the radar.
Yeah, I do agree with that. But like I say, I'm all about these. Like I love the idea of the freedom that you would feel. But for me, that time will be when there's a floating island, which is much bigger. So for me, I need to step over. It's like I don't want a wired phone. I want my mobile phone. I want to go straight to the mobile phone. I don't want, do you know what I mean?
Just like everybody else.
Well, not necessarily. Well, yeah, most people.
I don't think it's very long until there's something out at sea the size of, say, this city block that has grass and trees on it.
You reckon?
Oh, sure.
Like what? How long?
A decade, 2 decades.
A decade? 10 years? That's not very long at all.
Sure. I mean, it depends if someone wants to form some sort of business out there.
Yeah.
And then...
But that's important.
But on the sides
of this... Who is that person? That's very important. who is that person that wants to form a business out there? Because they've got to, don't forget, they need the 2 million to get the flag. They need the this, they need, it's a...
They don't need the 2 million. I want the nonprofit to have the 2 million to get the flag.
I know, but if you don't get it, the market will provide it in the end. And someone will incorporate it in their business model, right?
Yeah.
They'll have to.
Now that would be great. Take that off my hands, businessmen. I would love that.
But that's quite a bit expenditure just to get, before you've done any of the technological stuff, right? I don't know. I'm riffing. It was like...
Yeah. Well, just imagine this thing is floating out there. You can scuba dive all you want. So maybe no one even lives out there. Maybe it's just a business running a scuba diving thing that's better than the decommissioned oil rig that people are scuba diving at, many of which are very far from land. So you're just running that kind of business. Maybe the guy running that business wants to stay there and not have to go back to land every time. But soon enough, that could scale up, and then you want a store and other things, and a cafeteria. And the oil industry already has flotels that'll house 500 workers for weeks at a time.
What do they do about flags?
Well, those are flagged as oil rigs, and they have just deathly regulations.
So they've gone through that process already, the process that you want to go through.
Having scaled up. It all scales up. So at one point, people find this, how long ago did they find the black stuff in the ground and realize, hey, we can actually burn that and use it for fuel? Well, 500 miles out, 500 feet out to sea, there's some underneath the ocean. Well, how the hell are you going to drill through the ocean and go down to the ocean floor to get it? Plus, it's 500 miles from shore. Who's going to pay for that? How are you going to get the guys out there? Well, eventually, there's an incentive for someone to do some exploratory drilling and find that stuff. They use all that up. How do you get to the point where you're going 300 miles out? You're going down a mile until you hit the ground.
Yeah, but that.
So it's like impossible to imagine.
Everyone uses oil, but that's the thing. Everyone uses oil.
But they didn't use oil. They used kerosene lamps, which killed whales for the oil. The world had to shift to using oil by people drilling for it. So they started out drilling on land, but they started using up all that stuff. Then they had to realize the real stuff is out at sea. So there had to be a market demand, and they slowly scale up. And it's unimaginable what they're doing now.
So what do you think the market demand for floating cities will be in the end?
There's so many networks of markets. So
yeah, but oil is obvious. Oil makes plastic, runs engines,
pharmaceutical research.
You reckon?
Vitalia, if you're listening, you need your business not in Honduras but on a seastead. You guys really want to do this? You want to scale up life extension technologies rapidly. You want to use human cells instead of animal trials. You want eventually humans to go out there and research with full consent and try some of these therapies which aren't allowed now. You're going to need to do that on a seastead, and you guys can pay for it. If investors are serious,
imagine the PR.
The faster we have seasteaders, the longer you're going to live.
But imagine the PR of that. You know how they're going to report on that. Frankenstein Island. It's terrible, mate. How do you compete with the misinformation that will arise out of that?
I get the
Here comes the floating Frankenstein Island.
Yeah, let them write it. Let them write it, because they already are. This is already happening. Yeah. It's already happening. It's been happening since before I got involved. I want to create floating tax havens for Dr. Evil. That's the narrative. Keep writing it.
It's not productive.
And then 99.9% of people are enraged and hate me and everything I represent. And then 0.1% are inspired and come get involved and say, hey, I'm actually a naval architect, and I'm secretly an ANCAP, and I can't tell anyone. But I'll meet with you once a week and advise you guys. I'll meet with your team. Tell Peter Thiel that I'll help for free. And then I always have to break the news, well, Peter Thiel isn't helping us. Franken mobiles, write whatever you want. I have my alternative media. I can be on your podcast and tell the truth to the people willing to listen for 5 hours.
Yeah, but when you get terrible PR, unfortunately, people whisper in the ears of states, don't they? And they are always going to be the biggest enemy. I don't know. I'm not, dude, I'm not trying to.
No, not. Look, it's better to be criticized now than to face reality. So, what would be the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario I could possibly imagine is what actually happened was worse case scenario I possibly imagined.
What was that?
We build a little seastead. We put a loving couple on there. We make a little YouTube video. They're immediately charged with the death penalty. All the media in the whole world gangs up to lie about them, and there's a giant manhunt. They get away. They say goodbye to everything they know in their old world. Nadia had to say goodbye to everything she had ever known, fly to the other side of the world, and start seasteading again. That's the market. Those people, the real heroes that will be worshipped throughout history in the future. So I'm just not afraid because it's all happened. They lie about me right now. They lie about me nonstop. And people meet me. I'm like, oh, wait, I heard about this. Isn't there some asshole that wants to create tax havens for the rich? And I always say, yeah, that's actually me. I was that guy you saw on TV that you hate. So I'm already famous for being a selfish, white male, rich asshole who just wants to create tax havens for the rich. They will absolutely write that this is about Frankenstein Monster Island. Bring it on. Bring it on. There's nothing they can do that they haven't already done. They tried to kill us. People have been killed. People have died, and all the lies have already been told. All the lies have already been told.
Oh, I would say no, they haven't.
And they've been spread, and they'll make up more lies. Lies are infinite. But I have a seastead floating.
Well, okay. I think we've got to wrap it up. I don't know how long we've been rabbiting on.
All right, all you rich people listening, the Seasteading Institute needs your support. We need to 10x our budget, or we're just going to build floating eco-islands in the territorial waters. So contact the Seasteading Institute, ask whatever questions you want, and I'll explain why this is the path forward for freedom. Stop negotiating with governments. Get off the land because it can't happen there, not in a lasting way. And let's make 100,000 free societies on the sea.
Okay, Joe. We will. Well, you will. I will visit.
I'll see you there.
Okay, mate. Thanks for chatting. Another great conversation. I always appreciate your oratory skills. And I love how dedicated you are to this thing, because I think most people would have not taken as many knockbacks as you have. So well done for that. And thanks for coming on and sharing your wisdom again.
Thank you for the gift of your attention and for not editing this to make me look bad.
Okay. I won't need to, don't worry.
Yeah.